with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
And I get the feeling you've been cheated.
It is Wednesday, October 11th, 2023. My name is Sam Seder. This is the five-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live. Steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA, and also the plush conference room, the Bellagio Hotel in Las Vegas, Nevada. It is the Mass Torts Conference. October, right. We'll be talking to multiple attorneys bringing mass tort cases. Also on the program, power effectively gone. And communications all effectively gone in Gaza as Israel begins its assault. Meanwhile, 9 UN staffers killed in Gaza bombing. In Washington, House Republicans gather behind closed doors to attempt to elect a new Speaker of the House. And Jim Jordan's former Ohio State wrestlers speak out against the child predator and say he's not worthy of being Speaker. Feds file even more charges against George Santos. We're up to 23 superseding indictments. Turns out he was stealing from his own donors. So
Santos for Speaker.
Tracks. What's that? Oh yes, exactly. In a desperate plea for relevance, Ron DeSantis proposes Florida-based Iran sanctions. And early voting in Ohio on its constitutional amendment for abortion rights and also legal weed starts today in Ohio. Go vote. And North Carolina Republicans override law, essentially beginning their march to voter suppression in North Carolina. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I just wanted to keep this shot here for a second. I'm going to have guests right here, and as you can see, I'm in this big hall. Actually, most of it is that way, but I don't know. I chose this angle to do, but and everybody is in. Well, let me switch my camera angles here, and very fancy.
Whoa! And, yeah, look at that.
And let me bring in Emma Vigland. Emma, hello. You've been holding down the show. I think people probably recognize you more than they recognize me at this point. So almost no introduction needed whatsoever.
Well, I mean, it's hard to recognize you when you're dressed all spiffy like that as well. I mean, look at that. Look at this James Bond over here. Is that a skinny tie?
It might be. Yeah.
It's trendy.
Oh yeah, that's the way I go. And we all know what shirt I've got on here.
Mm-hmm. I knew it's Rowan. Gotta be.
Also, I should also say, I think you did an ad for him yesterday, but Z-Biotics comes in really handy in this type of situation. I am fully functioning today. All right, but with all that out of the way, yesterday, Joe Biden spoke, I guess, to the world in regards to what's going on in Israel and Palestine. Obviously, I've been off the air for the past couple of days watching this horror show, I guess, unravel and begin its descent into more unraveling. But here is Joe Biden he is speaking. I guess it was taking place. I'm not sure what time it was, but he was at the White House and addressing the fighting between Israel and Hamas.
Bloodthirstiness brings to mind the worst rampages of ISIS. This is terrorism. But sadly, for the Jewish people, it's not new. This attack has brought to the surface painful memories and the scars left by a millennia of anti-Semitism and genocide of the Jewish people. So in this moment, we must be crystal clear. We stand with Israel. We stand with Israel. And we will make sure Israel has what it needs to take care of its citizens, defend itself, and respond to this attack. There's no justification for terrorism. There's no excuse. Hamas does not stand for the Palestinian people's right to dignity and self-determination. Its stated purpose is the annihilation of the state of Israel and the murder of Jewish people. They use Palestinian civilians as human shields. Hamas offers nothing but terror and bloodshed with no regard to who pays the price. The loss of innocent life is heartbreaking. Like every nation in the world, Israel has the right to respond, indeed has a duty to respond to these vicious attacks. I just got off the phone with a third call with Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Do we lose Emma? Oh, there she is. Okay. I agree with the his sentiment about Hamas. I think it's obvious. They massacred civilians, and there, in my mind, there is no justification for that type of massacre, ever. And I frankly, I feel that way across the board in killing of civilians whatsoever. My concern at this point, though, is that in offering, I also think that Biden should, it's perfectly legitimate for him to offer full support to Israel. But I hope and sort of doubt at this point that Biden has suggested any constraints on the nature of the response by Israel. Early, I think, in the wake of these attacks, there were members of the State Department who were urging restraint on Twitter, and I think they deleted those tweets. There's been reports of that, anyways. Nevertheless, when you hear the statements from the Israeli defense minister that they're going to cut off food and power, fuel, which they effectively have done at this point, there is apparently no more power in the country, and thereby they will then shortly cut off really any ability to even record what's going on there. I mean, I think there are some journalists there. 7 have already died. 2 Israeli journalists have died. 7 Palestinian journalists have died. You got UN staffers, like we mentioned, dead from the bombing. And they have essentially cut off the only escape valve and the only aid valve to Gaza in Egypt by bombing the Rafah gate. And it seems like a concerted effort to make it impossible for information to even be, in some instances, recorded in Gaza, never mind in real-time reports. And it's going to end up killing who knows how many hundreds, thousands of civilians.
Let alone the lack of electricity going to the hospitals. There are patients in Gaza who are undergoing cancer treatment, who are undergoing, kidney dialysis, that need electricity on a daily basis to continue their treatments. And then that's to say nothing of the thousands and thousands that will be wounded and mortally injured who will need that hospital care.
Right. And that even includes, from my understanding, reports of at least one of the Israelis who were kidnapped. Israel, I can't remember which minister it was, basically said, we're not that interested in the those that have been kidnapped at this point. That's not our primary interest. And again, there's no justifying the actions of Hamas, but I don't think there's any justifying in engaging in bombing, and that is going to is going to lead to the deaths of thousands of innocents. I just don't.
It's a war crime. It's collective punishment. That is what is that. That is definitionally a war crime.
And so from a moral standpoint, I just don't. Obviously, what Hamas did is, in some respects, more sort of viscerally barbaric, but only because it's person to person. You don't see a family that you blow up with a missile or from the sky, and you don't see their bodies under the rubble, and you don't see images of a pre-existing life. And the images coming out of southern Israel are incredibly disturbing and shocking. But the whole point of the U.S. in this dynamic is to urge restraint in these moments. And it's disappointing. I mean, if Biden didn't urge this restraint in private, it is really, it's an abdication. And aside from that assessment, there is absolutely no reason to believe that this is going to fundamentally alter. Israel can go in, they can kill thousands upon thousands. They can kill thousands upon thousands of Hamas fighters. I've seen projections that maybe there's 40,000, 1,500 of the Hamas fighters, the terrorists, were killed in southern Israel. We don't know how many actually came through, because obviously some went back and took prisoners back. But you're going to radicalize a whole new generation of Hamas fighters. Half of Gaza is under the age of 18.
And that's also the result of what we saw. When you have a country where there is actually zero hope, I mean, that's been stamped out. They've been under the thumb of the Israeli occupation for decades at this point, when the population skews very young. As you say, half of the population in Palestine is under the age
in Gaza,
is under the age of our children, but still the median age in Palestine is, I think, a little over 19 years old.
Yes, not much higher.
So the point there is that when there's no hope and no economic opportunity, and there's no real ability to change your situation, that just is the exact kind of funnel system into radical groups like Hamas. And we've seen this before. You can draw a line to a group like ISIS, for example, that was created in the wake of the destruction that the United States created in the Middle East. This is the kind of radicalization funnel that we are trying to cut off. Like, we're trying to cut off groups like Hamas at their roots, as opposed to then imposing collective punishment on an entire desperate population that doesn't have clean water and doesn't have the ability to change their situation in any meaningful way. The power lies with Israel in this instance, and Netanyahu, he cannot afford to reflect right now or take some sort of measured approach because of his domestic political situation.
Yeah, and nor I think is he inclined to. And also, you look at, you have people like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir who are self-avowedly fascist.
Yep.
I think Smotrich even used the word. But I don't know that Ben-Gvir would have that much of an issue with it. He would call it something else, maybe. But and really, so aside from the fact that Gaza is essentially and continued bombing and destruction of Gaza and is like a radicalization machine, essentially. The other problem that Israel has is that the reason why, at least the early reports that I read, the reason why there was so little human protection on that border with Gaza is because so much of the IDF had been sent up into the West Bank to function as essentially, guards for fundamentalist settlers to engage in their own mini versions of pogroms themselves. Certainly not as violent and as what the Hamas terrorists did, but dispossessing people of their land and basically ethnic cleansing on the West Bank. And I guess the point is, and it remains to be seen if there will be a reckoning with this at one point in Israel, but they, as a country, do not have the material resources needed to oppress these many people going forward in the future. It's just simply unsustainable. And for a long time, they had kidded themselves and said that it is sustainable to themselves. But I think I hope that there is a reckoning that it's unsustainable, that they need to figure out a new path forward.
Yeah.
Because that's the only way that anything's going to change. They're going to mow the lawn, as they say, in Gaza, but the grass will grow back.
But that's what I meant about, just really quickly, about Netanyahu, this situation being untenable. What you described, the intelligence failure, the fact that those troops were deployed to help with the settlements, that meant that there were fewer troops that had traditionally been on that southern border, and a lot of domestic papers in Israel are being critical of Netanyahu for that. So instead of letting that moment hang, he's going to go full bore on Palestinian dehumanization so that his ass is not on the line in this way. Right. Yeah, he has plenty of motivation to do it politically and also in terms of his coalition. And I would imagine that, there's very little constituency within Israel right now for restraint. And in many respects, that's where the U.S. used to be helpful in this conflict. And that stopped around the time of the Bush administration. In fact, they pushed that the election that brought Hamas to power. I should say the Hamas was, I'm sure you've gone over this over the past couple of days, but Hamas was elected 17 years ago. There hasn't been another a vote. Hamas itself was essentially midwifed by the Israeli government. This
They
is a
wanted.
quote, yeah, from Netanyahu in 2019. Talking to the Likud members of his party. Anyone who wants to thwart the establishment of a Palestinian state has to support bolstering Hamas and transferring money to Hamas. This is part of our strategy to isolate the Palestinians in Gaza from the Palestinians in the West Bank.
You can look at, there's a Wall Street Journal piece from 2009 by Andrew Higgins, retired Israeli official Avner Cohen. 30 years earlier, in about 1980, 79, Hamas, to my great regret, is Israel's creation, said Mr. Cohen, who worked in Gaza for more than two decades, responsible for the religious affairs in the region until 94. Mr. Cohen watched the Islamist movement take shape, muscle aside secular Palestinian rivals, and then morph into what is today Hamas. Instead of trying to curb Gaza's Islamists from the outset, says Mr. Cohen, Israel for years tolerated and in some cases encouraged them as a counterweight to the secular nationalists of the Palestinian Liberation Organization. And Yasser Arafat. I mean, this is, this is years in the making. It doesn't justify anything that Hamas did, I would love to see sitting next to Ariel Sharon and Yasser Arafat in the sort of trials against humanity, and they're both sitting there in hellfire. I would love to put Netanyahu and all of the leadership of Hamas to join them. But nevertheless, if the idea is to have less killing and more human rights, none of this is going to help. All right, let's turn to something a little bit more, another conflict that's a little bit more fun. And that, of course, is happening right now. I think it is, right? In a closed-door session, the Republicans are trying to hash it out between Jim Jordan and
Steve Scalise.
Do we have a clip on that? Yeah,
we do.
Oh.
I think we also have we have two clips that are relevant. One is Kevin McCarthy seemingly just being unable to keep himself out of the headlines. He gave a speech that was ostensibly about the Hamas attack in Israel, but he just went on and on the other day about himself and the Republican caucus, and a lot of journalists who were covering it were like, this doesn't sound like a guy who's stepping aside from at least his desire to be speaker. But he's back. He went on Larry Kudlow's show last night, and he did say that he told his conference to not nominate him for speaker again. But you can see at least where his loyalties lie, I think, from this clip.
All right, let's play this.
And let me just ask you, in the Republican conference meetings, if you're nominated to run for speaker again, we accept it?
Look, I've asked those that want to nominate me not to nominate me. Let these two running to go and see they can unite the conference.
Do you? If there's a stalemate, Kevin, do you have any intention of supporting anybody?
Look, I'm going to support somebody. They're going to be able to try to put this together. But the one thing we have to learn in the country as well, if we still have 8 people in our conference that is going to partner with all the other Democrats, we don't have a majority. If 8 people, 4% of our conference can go against 96% of what we want, we don't have a conference. And those people are not conservatives. You and I are conservative that want to govern. Those are individuals that just want to get clicks and be on camera.
Well, we can't.
That's not governing.
You're right.
Okay, but the problem, dude, with your entire assertion here is that this is the deal that you made.
It was a creation by McCarthy.
He is the reason that he is no longer speaker in that he was so desperate to gain power that he made a deal with Matt Gaetz and company that would put a motion to vacate in the deal, essentially saying that any member at any time could bring up a vote to vacate the speaker and kick him out of his position. It was after 15 rounds of voting in January, and it seemed like they were deadlocked, and he wasn't able to get over the hump, and he wanted power so badly that that was the deal that he made. Matt Gaetz took him up on it and vacated him, and now he's complaining about it. That is just, I mean, I cannot believe he's made this point a million times in the press, and no one is calling him on that. Not that Kudlow would, but
my favorite part is also, do you remember all those quotes with like, bring it on? And if you want to, motion to vacate, do it. Come after me, mother effers. And now he's not so tough. But it's interesting. He's clearly his plan is to hope that neither Jordan or Scalise can get the votes, and that he'll end up being the default. We got to have a speaker, and that'll be it. I mean, that's clearly his plan. We'll talk more about that in a moment. Let me I get a couple of words from our sponsors, and then I'm going to be talking to Chris Dietze, the a lawyer on the talc settlement, and this dynamic of folks who have been sued essentially using Chapter 11 of bankruptcy to hide from their rulings. But first, one of our sponsors today is Beam Dream. Why? Because sleep is, probably the most important thing that you can do for yourself in terms of your long-term health and your disposition, and so that you don't yell at your kids. Sleeping less than 6 to 7 hours per night is linked to reduced white blood cell count. Of course, white blood cells are about your immune system. Sleep is the foundation of mental and physical health. You need to have a consistent nighttime routine to go to sleep. And I use a bunch of different things, but I have managed to work myself off of the drugs I was taking for sleep for a long time. And one of the things I have started to work into my regimen is Beam Dream. It is Beam Dream is a powder that you mix with either hot water or hot milk, and it basically is like hot cocoa, but for sleep. Today, you guys can get a discount on Beam Dream's powder. It's their best-selling healthy hot cocoa, no added sugar. Has flavors like sea salt, caramel, cinnamon, cocoa, chocolate peanut butter. This stuff tastes really good, but really more importantly, it has a natural blend of reishi, magnesium, which I think helps with the uptake, L-theanine, and melatonin, all stuff that helps your sleep and help you stay asleep, and then wake up refreshed. Recent clinical study revealed that Dream helped 93% of users wake up feeling more refreshed, and 93% reported that Dream helped them get a more restful night's sleep. It's easy. You just mix Beam Dream with hot water or milk. You stir or you froth it. They actually give you a little frother. And it works. Half an hour later, you're sleepy and you stay asleep. You wake up, you feel refreshed. Find out why Forbes and New York Times are all talking about Beam and why it's trusted by the world's top athletes and business professionals. If you want to try Beam's best-selling Dream Powder and get up to 40% off for a limited time, go to shopbeam.com/majority. Use the code majority at checkout. That's BEAM.com/majority. Use the code majority for up to 40% off. And also a new sponsor today. We've talked about the problems with plastic and recycling. There's only so much that you can do, but you should do it. 5 billion plastic hand soap and cleaning bottles are thrown away each year. And most cleaning formulas, incidentally, are 90% water. So it's heavy to ship it. It uses these massive plastic bottles. It's completely unnecessary. And many of those products are, have stuff like chlorine and ammonia in it. That is a lose situation for you and the planet. Blue Land is on a mission to eliminate single-use plastic by reinventing cleaning essentials to be better for you and the planet. Their idea is simple. They offer endlessly refillable cleaning products with a beautiful, cohesive design that looks great on your counter. So all you do is you just fill your bottles with water, and they have tablets, which is also good because this means you don't have to bring a 400-pound container of washing liquid into your tiny apartment. You drop the tablets in, you wait for them to dissolve. You're never going to have to grab any of those big, bulky cleaning supplies ever again. Refills start at just $2.25. You can even set up a subscription or buy in bulk for additional savings. They have cleaning sprays, they have hand soap, they have toilet bowl cleaner, laundry tablets, they got more. All Blue Land products are made with clean ingredients you can feel good about. This is the stuff I've been waiting my whole life for, because having to bring in all these big plastic bottles, huge pain in the ass. I live in a small apartment. It is incredibly convenient. It looks better. I feel better. I'm not spraying all this toxic stuff around the house. Check it out. Blue Land has a special offer for our listeners. Right now, you get 15% off your first order by going to blueland.com/majority. You don't want to miss this. blueland.com/majority, 15% off. That's blueland.com/majority to get 15% off. Okay, so Emma, I'm going to switch to my two-shot camera now.
All right.
And welcome to the program. Chris, you about ready? All right. We'll go live here. And we'll join you in just a bit, Emma.
Sounds good.
So continuing with our coverage here at Mass Torts 2023. It's October. It's the fall version. I missed the spring version. I want to welcome back to the program Chris Tisi. Chris, tell us what law firm are you with?
I'm with Levin.
Oh, sorry. Hold on 1 second. Let's try that one more time. Go ahead.
I'm with Levin, Papitonio, Rafferty, and Pennsylvania.
Bear with me one more time. All right, say your name again. I'm sorry.
Okay. My name is Chris Tisi, and I'm with Levin, Papitonio, Rafferty in Pensacola, Florida.
And so welcome back, Chris.
Thank you.
I think we've talked a little bit about the talc situation. Just recap for us, but then I really do want to talk about the dynamic of what I guess what they call the Texas two-step. but tell us about the talc settlement.
Well, there is no talc settlement. There is at some point there was a proposal by J&J in bankruptcy,
Johnson & Johnson,
that there be a talc settlement. It was, in our view and the view of people who really have worked on these cases for many years, inadequate to compensate the people who really were injured with using Johnson's baby powder.
Will you just give us a recap of the case?
Of the case from what happened? I mean, for 50 years or more, Johnson & Johnson was aware that there were serious safety concerns with talc, which after all is mined from the earth and gets brought up with the product. Anything that's in the ground. We found asbestos, we found nickel and chromium and all kinds of things that are carcinogens. And for years, it ignored warnings that there was a serious risk. Went after scientists that were publishing papers. And this went on for half a century.
Wow.
And they had plenty of opportunities to take it off the market. And the really important thing is this is a cosmetic. This is a product that people don't really need. And there's a safer alternative. Right now, if you go to the supermarket, you're going to get baby powder with cornstarch and not notice the difference.
So what was the value of them to talc for so many years?
Well, what was important and what distinguished Johnson & Johnson from every other pharmaceutical company was its iconic products, whether it be Tylenol, whether it be Johnson's baby powder. And those are the things that they used to create goodwill in the minds of the American people. When I know when I was born, when my kids were born, they received a baby blanket and a bottle of Johnson's baby powder when they left the hospital. So it was really something that a brand that allowed the company to distinguish itself in the marketplace, and it was built on trust, and they broke that trust.
All right, and so where and are there going to be payouts now? Like what?
So what happened was almost 2 years ago, actually 2 years ago, right about now, Johnson & Johnson, faced with people who were making claims for ovarian cancer and mesothelioma, decided that it was going to do what we've called the Texas two-step. They basically took the company that did that made the Johnson's baby powder, took the profitable part and made it a separate company, took the part with baby powder and sent it into bankruptcy. And that company was called LTL. This way the public wouldn't really know it was Johnson & Johnson. And they, for 2 years, we have been stuck in bankruptcy while they tried to cram down a settlement against people, hoping that people would just get tired and want to move on. And I just want to take a second to talk about the two-step, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, that actually is sort of why I wanted to, get to this. So this happens a lot, right? I mean, like Alex Jones is trying to do this. I think, sort of like more famously, maybe,
right.
Or, people are aware of it. But this happens a lot. I feel like it happened also with the C8 DuPont case on some level.
It happened with 3M. Tried to do it with the earplug litigation. They tried to do it there. Other companies are trying to do it. And what really distinguishes...
Is this a new phenomenon?
It is totally a new phenomenon. And what really distinguishes this from other cases is, kind of something basic that gets lost in all this. Johnson & Johnson is not, nor has it ever been, a bankrupt company. And so the tools of bankruptcy are there to allow people, companies, individuals, who start a business, who get into financial trouble. It gives them relief, and it gives people a new start in their lives. I mean, if you think of somebody who owns a family farm, they declare bankruptcy, they're able to wipe their debts away and start again. And our system, really, that bankruptcy system, it's actually in the Constitution. Yeah. And what companies like Johnson & Johnson did was take it to a new level. And it's an incredibly powerful tool, because once they file for bankruptcy, all litigation stops. And in a case like this,
So in other words, you don't even need the judge to sign off on a protection of creditors. There's an automatic, I'm in like a safe harbor as soon as I declare, regardless of what the outcome is going to be.
It's called an automatic stay. And then then what they do is they take the bankrupt company and then they expand it to include Johnson & Johnson, who never declared bankruptcy. Because if Johnson & Johnson had declared bankruptcy, it would subject its company, its assets, to the oversight by a judge. By doing it this way, they continued to pay out billions of dollars in stock dividends, and then kept these poor women who have ovarian cancer stuck in bankruptcy. It's really
I don't understand.
criminal.
How do you declare bankruptcy but not actually have the proceedings go forward?
What they did was they took this shell company, they put all the liability in all their talc liabilities into that company, and then they said, well, that company can't pay out its debts, and so now it has to be in bankruptcy. And it's...
But how do you put your liability into a different company? I would like to do that.
I'm watching your face as you're asking me this question, and you're scratching your head saying, how is it possible?
Well, yeah.
Is
there a way I can take my car payments and put them on somebody else say they don't have any money left?
You cannot, and that's what was really unique about this. And look, I mean, if Johnson & Johnson was bankrupt, I mean, if its liabilities were greater than its income, or if it wanted to subject itself to the oversight of the court, fine. declare bankruptcy and we'll deal it. But it didn't.
But how do you like transfer those liabilities? That's what's going on here, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not the bankruptcy. LTL or whatever the company is may very well be bankrupt, but what was their one function to do? Just to buy other people's liabilities?
Yes.
I mean, that's not. It seems
they
like
made no products. They had no employees. I mean, they had a few employees basically to administer. LTL stands for Legacy Talc Liability. Okay, that's what the company was for.
But how do you, as someone who like I brought suit against you,
right?
How do you say like, okay, the part of me that you brought suit against, I've transferred that to another person? Like, how do you do that as an entity, as a corporate entity?
Well, the corporate statutes of different states allow companies to, and we see it all the time. They divide, they merge, they separate, they develop new configurations, and under the Texas statute, they were allowed to divide the profitable part of the company, allow that company to move forward, and then keep and give the bad parts of the company,
the ones that just had liabilities. And
it was only, I mean, it wasn't all creditors, right? It wasn't the people who, built the buildings and swept the floors. It was only women with ovarian cancer and as well people with mesothelioma. They were the only people that were subject to this. And it was, I mean, look, they just held hearings in Congress on this, and on a bipartisan basis, they were outraged. I mean, Congress was outraged. This is not what they envisioned the bankruptcy code to do, to shield profitable companies. It's an incredibly powerful tool that was, in my view and the view of many people, not only was misused in this case, but creates a threat to our system of taking a case, bringing it to a jury of your peers, and allowing them to decide whether or not you should be compensated, and if so, how much. And what it does is, a lot of people say, well, a lot, including the bankruptcy judge, said, well, why don't we make an administrative process and take that right away from people? They can get paid on a grid, and it's more efficient. But our system depends upon our ability to go to court,
right?
And address grievances. So it was clever, but it was wrong.
And so how do you deal with that? I mean, like, what do you do in that situation?
Well, okay, I've kind of left out something that is really important. Both the Third Circuit Court of Appeals dismissed the bankruptcy in April of this year. Johnson & Johnson immediately refiled it.
So Third Circuit, and that's the Texas and the...
No, that's in Philadelphia. They filed, they ultimately, the case was actually transferred to New Jersey, where Johnson & Johnson is.
Oh, I see. Okay,
and so
the Fifth Circuit is in Texas. And but okay, so the Third Circuit said, no, we reject your bankruptcy.
Right.
From talc liability,
LTL.
To fake company, we reject your bankruptcy, and so they're still on the hook. They have no protection from them, and they can't go into bankruptcy. So but
they did. That's the thing that's so crazy, Sam, is they, within an hour of the dismissal of the bankruptcy, after the Third Circuit said they're not in financial distress, they don't get to use the bankruptcy code, they refiled bankruptcy a second time, and they tried to argue that a lot of claimants or potential claimants supported them in doing it, and therefore they get a second bite at the apple. In August of this year, following the precedent of the appeals court, the bankruptcy court dismissed it again. So we are now asking us where we are now. We're getting ready for trials. We are looking forward to trying cases, and we're back to where we should have been 2 years ago.
Okay, and so you're trying cases, and who's the defendant now? Is it still Johnson & Johnson, or do you bring in
LTL? Good question. LTL is now the company that owns the liability. We're bringing in Johnson & Johnson, and we're bringing in the old company, which is called Kenview, and we're bringing them all into court. And one of the things we expect the jury to know and understand
how they've tried
to avoid responsibility for what they've done to these women over half a century.
And so there are cases that have already been won, or
there are cases that have been won, cases that have been lost,
and they're waiting for payout from LTL, or no?
There have been cases that have been paid. There was a very well publicized verdict of several $1 billion out of Missouri. There were multiple verdicts for both mesothelioma and ovarian cancer victims, and there have been losses as well. But that's our system, right? I mean,
right. No, and so let me ask you this: so these cases are individual, or how are they mass?
They're individuals.
They're individuals,
and we're trying to get. We have cases we're trying to get set in the federal courts and the state courts around the country, and it's our desire to show Johnson & Johnson that we're serious, that they've been delaying this process for a long time, and we're not giving up.
So the idea is Johnson & Johnson realizes that there are thousands.
Right now there are 50,000 claims.
Okay, so there are potentially 50,000 trials out there to be had. Some of which maybe they'll win, some of which maybe they'll lose. And ultimately what you guys are looking for, if you're representing, you're obviously not representing all 50,000,
right?
But is an opportunity for them to just say, we're going to give a blanket settlement that on average will cover, or will create an account in which people could apply to in some fashion.
Or in the end of the day, I mean, this is about human beings. This is about people, their families. And if they were to offer money that I felt I could recommend that would fairly compensate them, I would do that. And so if they made, like they do in many mass tort cases, I mean, there are cases that are larger than this in terms of the numbers. And if the company were to make a, there are plenty of vehicles they have to resolve these cases.
Right.
They just chose the one where they had all the power, and the women and victims did not have the power. And that's the travesty. That's what makes this case different from all the cases that you've heard going forward. You've heard in the past, and a profitable company. I mean, Johnson & Johnson is a $500 billion company that has a rating, a financial rating better than the United States government, right? And the idea of Johnson & Johnson using the bankruptcy code is just wrong.
Right.
We don't do that in this country. I mean, we pride ourselves in the fact that, individual people who are your neighbors can resolve disputes. And they wanted to take that away because they're big and powerful. And we said no.
And so when will you have a sense of, like, I mean, it sounds like the attempts to plead bankruptcy are sort of over with, right? I mean, how many bites at that apple? At one point they eat the core and there's nothing left.
They have shown themselves to be shameless. So what they do, we will deal with it as it comes. I feel like whether it be our elected representatives or the public are kind of turning on them for what they've done. And I think the public has got it right. And I am pleased that people are outraged by what they've done. And so, is there a possibility they try to do it again? Sure. They could try to do it again, and we will take that as it comes. But right now, we're planning on on going to trial.
Great. Well, Chris Teetsy, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I really do appreciate it.
Always great catching up with you about these cases.
Appreciate it.
All right. Folks, I'm going to switch the camera back just so that it's not so jarring to people. Chris, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Amazing.
Hello.
So there you have it. I mean, the way that they will attempt to skirt respond. I had no idea you could just start a company that basically just has your liabilities. Apparently, right now you can't get away with that. But in about 20 minutes, we're going to be talking to Sarah Papantonio, I believe.
Oh,
and there's some cases with infant formula that is a little bit disturbing, but we'll talk about that in terms of the corporate stuff. Let's just get back to some of the, I don't know if you want to do the, you have one or two other clips about this, about the Republicans.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah, we'll start here. Would you rather do this Nancy Mace thing, or would you rather talk about Jim Jordan?
Well, let's talk about Jim Jordan for a moment, and then we'll get to Nancy Mace.
Sure.
If we get to it.
So Jim Jordan, I would say at this point, is the front runner to be the next Speaker of the House because Donald Trump has endorsed him, and
and George Santos.
Oh, of course. Well, that's the winning one there.
Well,
baby.
I'll tell you something. That is at least gives you a sense of who you think who George Santos thinks is going to win.
Yeah.
Because he's desperate. I mean, he is in desperate straits. That guy is a guy who, is a con man and survivor. Like I say, we announced this at the top of the show that he has been indicted now on 23 charges.
Yeah, 10 more announced yesterday.
And he was stealing the credit card numbers of his donors and charging extra stuff for himself on
and
it.
Republicans are like, we like your hustle, dude, but you've just got to charm the donors and then do something for them in office, and then they'll pay you. You just got to play a longer game. You got to be smarter about it, buddy.
It leads me to believe that his entire run was really just about it was the producers it was a Springtime for Hitler type of production where he's just I'm not going to win, and people don't really investigate that much a losing campaign, and I'll get to keep the money, and I'll be I'll get a little bit of fame as a former congressman, and he won.
And who also had a producers like campaign and ended up actually winning? Donald Trump, who was running for president to make more money and expand his brand recognition. So it makes sense that Santos and Trump have endorsed this scummy guy, Jim Jordan. And, the other frontrunner for the race is Steve Scalise, who is the majority leader in the House and would naturally, given the chain of leadership, would probably be the person in other circumstances that would take over. But Steve Scalise is undergoing treatment for blood cancer. I think it's difficult for him to be talking to people and working the same workload that he normally would. And it creates an uphill battle situation for him, unfortunately. I mean, that shouldn't be the case, but this is the Republican Party we're talking about. But we should say, because it's the Republicans, the fact that he used to introduce himself as David Duke without the baggage is actually not a liability. Right.
We should just say.
But they're trying to hopefully get, I guess, the people who are opposing Jim Jordan are trying to get this into the conversation, which is baggage and still is not talked about enough. NBC spoke to some of the former wrestlers on the Ohio State wrestling team that were either witnesses to the victimization of wrestlers or victims themselves. And Jim Jordan was an assistant coach at that time. And according to multiple accounts helped cover up this systemic sexual abuse by the coach here. This is an ABC 6 Ohio report, kind of just laying out what some of these wrestlers are now saying to the press. No sound.
Free. I was at a gathering of women the other night.
It's okay. Wrong clip. 1 second.
I should also say that we have in the past played testimony that I think was given at a hearing in Ohio.
Yeah, we played that yesterday. Yeah.
Oh, you did play? I mean, and it's a couple of years old now. Mm-hmm. It's amazing testimony. And it's also amazing that Jim Jordan called crying. I think said, was that the clip that you played?
Yes. Called this guy
crying. Yeah. Please don't do this. Please don't tell anybody. Amazing. Here, we got it. Let's play it.
This is the clip.
Here in Ohio, 4 former Ohio State wrestlers are speaking out. They say Jordan has no business becoming the next Speaker of the House.
Former Buckeyes say Jordan failed to protect them from a sexual predator when he was the team's assistant coach back in the 80s and 90s. The sexual predator that they are talking about is Dr. Richard Strauss. Right now, more than 230 men are suing the university, saying Strauss abused them over more than 2 decades. Well, addressing Jordan's potential speakership, former wrestler Mike Schick says, quote, "Do you really want a guy in that job who chose to not stand up for his guys? Is that the kind of character trait you want for a House Speaker?" In the past, Jordan has repeatedly said he knew nothing about the abuse. That claim has been met with anger by some former wrestlers. Earlier this year, the Supreme Court allowed the lawsuit against the university to continue. The university has since apologized to the victims, reaching more than $60 million in settlements with nearly 300 people. Here in Ohio.
So, I mean, the fact that the Supreme Court has allowed that suit to continue, that means that Jim Jordan is going to continue to be in the news for this. He's trying to put this behind him so he can become Speaker of the House. But with this lawsuit moving forward, I can't imagine that this story is going to go quietly into that good night, especially if he's the leader of the Republicans in the House.
What's also stunning is that maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think this has gotten any real national media attention.
Yeah.
It sort of boggles the mind that, and I don't know if people watch network news anymore, or I would imagine it's been on MSNBC, but I don't know that it's been on CNN. I mean, I don't know that we've ever played a clip of it from CNN, which is sort of mind-boggling. I mean, this is not some dry, real estate transaction that, I mean, there's testimony, and these guys are willing to speak out of, Jim Jordan turning an eye potentially could have saved, 5, 10, 15, 20, dozens of wrestlers from getting sexually assaulted by this doctor. It's amazing to me that it hasn't gotten more attention.
Yeah, and it would be one thing if he was just some congressman from Ohio, but he's now
running for Speaker of the House.
And before that, he was the chair of the Oversight Committee. Yeah. That should be getting more national attention, as you say. Luckily, it appears that local ABC Ohio report is pulling from an NBC News report on this, and there are a few more quotes here, if you want me to read them. But
yeah, please do.
Dunyasha Yates, another former OSU wrestler who has publicly and repeatedly accused Jordan of lying about not knowing what Strauss was doing to the athletes, said the congressman's, quote, hypocrisy is unbelievable. He doesn't deserve to be House Speaker, Yates said. He still has to answer for what happened to us. Rocky Ratliff, a former OSU wrestler and alleged Strauss victim, who was also a lawyer representing some of the plaintiffs suing the school, said Jordan, quote, abandoned his former wrestlers in the Ohio State sexual abuse scandal and cover-up. There are more quotes in here, really, but they've already paid out $60 million in settlements to 296 victims, as they said. But now, in June, the U.S. Supreme Court stymied OSU's attempt to dismiss the remaining lawsuits against the school. So more is coming. But Speaker of the House, baby.
if David Duke without the baggage, like that quote just gets put to the side, they can enable somebody to be Speaker of the House who's covered up mass systemic sexual abuse.
I know it. It's amazing, isn't it? Like those are their two choices. That's a deep bench, but just not in the way that you'd probably want if you're a political party.
Exactly.
I mean, it's sort of hard to, I think, like put together those are your two top candidates for Speaker of the House. Let's check in with Nancy Mace on this whole fight for the speakership has done to her. Like I can only imagine that she is worried about this 2024 election. She is worried that she is a member of the party that is, if they have the opportunity to pass a federal ban on abortion, they will. Mm-hmm. And her being a member of that party will, even if she votes against it, will help it happen by simply having a Republican have the speakership gavel. So she is out there really now. This is her sort of
playing the victim.
Yeah, Nancy. There's is it Collins in Maine? She's got that quality going on, but now doing it as if she's being attacked from the right.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm wearing the scarlet letter after the week that I just had last week, being a woman up here and being demonized for my vote and for my voice. I'm here to let the rest of the world know and the country know I'm on the side of the people. I'm not on the side of the establishment, and I'm going to do the right thing every single time, no matter the consequences, because I don't answer to anybody in D.C. I don't answer to anyone in Washington. I only answer to the people. Thank you.
Well, okay. Put it on your chest. I mean, this is not what it's
like. How weird do you have to be like, this is what I should do?
Exactly.
I'm gonna wear a scarlet.
I gotta give credit
Prynne.
to Steve Morris of The Recount, who tweeted, "I'm absolutely obsessed with the fact that Nancy Mace's whole thing is like, what if 2007 John McCain had a theater degree?" And I just thought that kind of sums up that intention-seeking like behavior that she's displaying, where she's trying to be the person that's sticking it to both parties and, oh, woe is me, I'm the victim, I'm the maverick, I'm the scarlet letter, I'm been branded with the scarlet letter for, voting to vacate, joining with like the most conservative extreme Republicans to just torpedo our party's public perception as, and our ability to govern.
I mean, I think it's a good strategy though for her, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, it's shameless. And it's disingenuous. But I think it's a good strategy if she's going into this 2024 election and she's worried about, I don't know. I mean, she's worried. I think her district, right? Bradley is probably one of the more purple ones in South Carolina.
Yeah, Bradley's checking now. But she did have a closer than expected re-election effort.
So the Cook PVI is close. It's +7 now, but I think it was a little bit bluer prior because Joe Cunningham was the representative there, who was a Democrat, like a pretty centrist, almost conservative Democrat, and then Mace beat him to take his spot. So I think it's gotten redder over time, but it's definitely, I think, in South Carolina, outside of like Jim Clyburn, the most like purple seat.
Interesting.
And this is the way I guess she locks that in, or she thinks she locks that in. It will be interesting to see how that impacts her. All right, so we're going to take I've got another guest joining me. Here, Sarah, pull, and the camera's that way, so if you could just sort of angle that way, that's cool. All right, Emma, I'll be back or you'll be back in a couple of minutes. And I'm going to go to that 2-shot again. That's pretty fancy what we got going on here. And it'll take a moment just for the focus to come in. Want to welcome back to the program Sarah Papantonio, from the firm. Oh,
Thank you for having me.
thanks for joining us. Let's talk about, you're working on a baby infant.
Infant formula. So we've got manufacturers like Abbott Laboratories and Mead Johnson manufacturing preterm infant formula. So this is formula for babies 37 weeks or below. And what we're finding is that it's causing necrotizing enterocolitis in those preterm infants.
Okay, what is necrotizing
enterocolitis? So it is probably one of the most tragic diseases that you can see in an infant or child. Necrotizing enterocolitis is essentially when bacteria enters the intestines and the gut of the child and causes the intestines to break down. So that little baby's gut, small intestinal tract, starts to eat itself from the inside out, and the baby's system just totally shuts down.
Okay, so I mean, all right, let's back up a little bit. Like, obviously, these are premature babies. They're not going to have the ability to latch on or breastfeed, so they need to be fed some type of formula. Have they always been fed this formula? I mean, what has been the standard of care, and did something change, or just an awareness that the outcomes were in part a function of the formula?
Right. So let me take you through the history of this. Infant formula has been around for a very long time. Of course, there's been advances in infant formula. The gold standard of infant feeding is always going to be breast milk. We know this. The manufacturers of infant formula know this. But what we've seen is as these corporations get bigger and bigger and the market for formula gets bigger and bigger, we see a shift. Right? Less women are breastfeeding and more women are using formula. The reason for that is, of course, motivated by profits, right? But I believe it's being sourced from the formula companies to decrease the risk of breast milk, ultimately to increase their profit margin, right? So as time has gone by, formula has always been available to children since the 1960s. But now we're seeing more advancements. Now we're seeing people starting to target NICUs. That's where these infants are being fed, in the intensive care unit, right?
Intensive care unit of neonatal, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know. I couldn't say neonatal. Okay.
But what were they fed before then?
But I mean, it's primarily a breast milk heavy diet, and so here's the problem.
So the women would pump. Is that
right?
It?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so the problem with formula, and we're not saying formula in general for infants is bad. We're saying formula for preterm infants is bad. Specifically, the cow's milk formula, right? Because preterm infants' guts cannot properly digest that cow's milk formula. And the unique aspect of this case is that science has been around for a long time. These formula manufacturers have known about the science, the increased risk associated with necrotizing enterocolitis and cow's milk formula for a long time, but they still continue to manufacture it. Why? Because the breast milk feeding rates have gone down and the formula feeding rates have gone up. And what we have found is that these companies create brand loyalty in the NICUs with mothers. They finally find a solution for feeding these little itty babies. The babies grow on that. They develop and they become loyal to that brand of formula, Abbott's brand, Mead's brand. And so it creates a brand loyalty for the next 3 years of that infant's life. And you just see, I compare it to big tobacco, to the opioid litigation. You have detailers, salespeople going into hospitals, getting hospitals, babies, mothers hooked on that type of formula so that ultimately they can create a customer for years to come.
Right. I mean, that's the dynamic. That's the dynamic with all products, it feels like, and even frankly, with political parties. I mean, if you start young on one, more often than not, you're going to carry through that. The problem is for these, did they have any reason to know, what do you need to prove in this instance? Like you have damages. Like, I mean, it's clear that from the science, I guess, I mean, you tell me, that these formulas are having bad outcomes with the children.
Mm-hmm.
What else do you need to prove for liability in this instance?
So when we walk into a case like this, the questions we ask ourselves and the questions that we ultimately have to show answer to a jury are what did this company know? What should they have known? And what did they do about it once they figured out that there was a problem associated with their product? In addition to those three questions, we have to also answer, well, is there what we call a safer alternative design out there? Is there something else that these babies could have been ingesting, feeding on, that would have been safer for them? And the truth is that there is. Since 2006, we've had a product called Prolacta. Prolacta is a type of infant formula that is derived from human milk base. So rather than the cow's milk, you have actual breast milk that is being formulated in that product and sold to the NICU. So that's our safer alternative design. That's when the defendants say, well, we had no choice. These babies have to be fed. We say, no, well, they could have been fed a safer product, and you just chose not to invest in that, to manufacture that, right? Because what we think we'll see is that in the end, a cow's milk-based formula is going to be cheaper for these companies to manufacture. Tale as old time.
It's almost
right.
Obvious that it would be.
And we see that. And I think that will really come out as this litigation goes forward, is it is a cost-benefit analysis every single time. Different case, same cost-benefit analysis. And that's what we see here.
Do they have to know that there was damage being done, or in how early in that process?
So these companies have to be put on notice of the issue, right? They have to be aware that their product is related to an increased risk of, in this case, necrotizing enterocolitis. And typically the way companies become aware of things like that is through clinical trials and independent studies and what we call cohort meta-analysis. And so as far back as the 1990s, you have studies coming out that say cow's milk is associated with an increased risk of necrotizing enterocolitis in preterm infants. Every single time a study is published like that should be a huge glaring red flag to the manufacturer. But instead, what we see them do and what they publicly do is they take that study, they rip it apart, they say, you can't trust this study for these reasons, and they ignore it. And they do that study after study after study. And then what you see them do is do their own internal clinical studies with the same flaws and use that as grounds to support that their product is safe.
And because what they're doing in terms of their strategy is they are playing this out as long as they can, because every day means X amount of profits. And so even if they know that at one point the music's going to end and we're going to have to, in this game, musical chairs, we're going to sit and we'll be left out, that cost associated is going to be a fraction of what they've been able to make by essentially punting every time a study comes out. There's problems with this study. This is why we punt. I mean, in their mind, they're thinking like the outcome's either going to be we're able to ignore these studies in perpetuity, or we're not able to ignore these studies in perpetuity, but long enough that there's no payouts that are going to in any way make it not worth it for us to keep paying. I mean, that is the 85% of every interview I've had here is basically that's what we're hearing.
And what they really do, frankly, the defendants do a good job of here is if you create just enough doubt in the scientific community, you can do just that. You can punt. And so if you create that doubt with industry funded science to challenge the independent science just a little bit, it allows them to keep manufacturing for a year, to continue on just enough until the crap really hits the fan, honestly, for lack of a better word.
And so where are you now in the process?
So we are in the height of discovery. And what that means is that we are in the defendant's file cabinets. We're reading what they knew, what they could have known, what they should have known, the internal studies that they were doing at the time all of this had come about. And that's how we really start to list out what we call the liability story, which will ultimately be shown to a jury, hopefully next year, or at the very least by the end of next year. And so what we are doing is we're putting together our themes and theories of the case. We are talking with mothers, hospitals, doctors, and really coming up with a solid just narrative and story for how these companies are taking advantage of mothers and children. And the unique part about this case that you don't see in big tobacco, that you don't see in opioids and some of these other pharma cases, is we're in a tough place because these formula companies hide behind this persona that they're saving babies' lives, that they're the reason that mothers can go to work and that babies can grow and premature babies are surviving for much longer. And there is some validity to that.
Right. I mean, if their product was not causing these problems, it would be serving that function. I mean, a lot of women can't breastfeed and or, you know, frankly, it's very difficult. I've been through it twice. I mean, I obviously don't breastfeed.
So, I mean, we certainly will have an uphill battle from the public image perspective that you don't have with other litigations, because they truly are feeding our most vulnerable population. But the point is, the second you know that your product has an increased risk that could harm even 5 babies, at that point is when you should start making a safer product, and they just have not done that.
In the discovery, I've always been curious about this. Like, they're supposed to hand over every email, every document that they have produced around this. How do you know that they've given you every email or every document?
I think the way someone described it to me once is for every every damning document you get from the defense, you can assume that there's one 10 times worse hidden somewhere else. There's no way to ever know that what you have is complete. But in the discovery process right now, my role is organizing all of the depositions, making sure we have the documents that we need. And time after time, when we get into these depositions, they will drop another 10,000 documents on us within a week's time of the deposition. And every time they tell us they're done, they drop 20,000 more documents. It's just a tactic that they use.
That I get. The idea of, like, we're going to dump our documents on you in an amount and in a fashion that will overwhelm your resources to sort of intake them and digest them. But, like, do you go through documents and then you find, like, hey, wait a second, here's a letter, here's an email from Bob to Mary, but where's the one, Bob's responding to something Mary said, but where's Mary's email to Bob?
Constantly.
And that's where you start to be aware that their documents we're not getting.
Yeah.
And so then you have to file with them to be like, we need Mary's end of this.
Oh, it is a constant game of back and forth. And let me tell you,
and then what if you get to the point where they're like, oh, we can't find it, or no, that's it. Bob just must have had a conversation with Mary at the water cooler about something. Like, how do you resolve? You go back into the judge and say, here's the situation. Like,
it's tough sometimes. Sometimes the judge can see right through it. Sometimes you have to take it to the actual witness who is writing the document and just beat them the heck up until they tell you the truth. And once you have affirmative statements from the witness saying, yeah, oh, I actually responded to that email and this is what I said, then you go back to the judge and say, look, they haven't produced everything to us. But let me tell you, these defendants have gotten so smart. And through tobacco, they learn lessons. Through opioid, they learn lessons. And what we're finding is that big corporations are having shorter time frames in which they preserve emails. Right? Some of the most damning documents we saw in the early mass torts are emails, because no one thought that attorneys would have the ability to go in and scour that. So now we have companies that have 6-month retention policies, 1-year retention policies, and we're talking about a case that goes all the way back to 2006. So there's a lot we don't know and that we'll never know, right? Because these companies are playing the game smarter.
Is there no opportunity for like some type of statutory fix for that? I mean, it seems to me like, look, as a private individual, I have to retain my, taxes for 7 years, I think it is, right? And why not as a function of you being issued a charter, a corporate charter in this state, or even to operate across state lines from a federal perspective, the regulation is you've got to keep your documents for 15 years or something.
Yeah, well, I think that is an awesome thought in theory, Sam, but I think you know how politics works, and that all of these corporations have every senator, every legislator in their pocket. And at the second that bill was even suggested, it would get put down immediately, because there no Johnson & Johnson, no Pfizer, no Abbott Labs would ever allow something like that, because they have seen the effect it has had in previous litigations, right? And so I don't know that we'll ever see that because of the way corporations control politics.
Interesting. Well, it's a fascinating case. And so if there are, in how does this, the form of colitis, I can't say the word, how does that present itself later? Like, at what point does it present? Is it something that develops in that moment, or is it something as the child grows, it becomes problematic?
So what happens is when the child ingests the cow's milk formula, the body does not know how to react to the cow's milk enzyme, so it attacks it. It attacks its own self. If the child is lucky enough to survive, then they have a host of issues for the rest of their life. What we're seeing a lot of is something called short gut syndrome. That is where they remove a large portion of your bowels and intestines, and for the rest of your life, you either have to have a colostrum bag, or you have significant problems digesting and taking down foods. Other times we see a significant lack of oxygen to the brain because your gut's not working in the right ways, and children are diagnosed with cerebral palsy. So a lot of deaths, but sometimes the alternative of living with all of these complications, these children have terrible, terrible lives ahead of them. And they just never had the chance, all because these doctors were not warned against that chance that their child would get neck.
How many cases are we talking about? Do you know?
So there's currently 2 tracks of lawsuits going on. We have the federal track, which is what I'm working with, and there's state law litigation. And I would say between both of those cases, we're seeing probably about 1,000 to 2,000 cases on file. Oh. And the interesting part is that based on the math that we've done, there's about 2,500 cases of NEC per year. And this goes back to 2006. We are not seeing as many mothers and fathers and families come forward. And I think it is largely due to the fact that mothers ultimately feel ashamed that this happened to their child. And it typically happens in settings where the mother cannot produce enough breast milk. So there's this guilt and the shame on the mother that says, well, if I had just produced breast milk, or if I had just done this, my child would have been alive. But what they don't know is that the whole time that their child was given this formula, that there was a safer alternative out there. And they don't know that because they were never warned against. The hospitals were never told this. And so there's this gut-wrenching shame that they have, which we need to do as attorneys a better job of telling mothers that, no, this is not your fault. You didn't know these things. You couldn't have known these things because the companies withheld that. And so I say all that to say is there's a lot of cases out there, but there is a lot of families that are scared to pursue it because it just opens up the horrible trauma that they went through, and then the shame and guilt that they might feel when in reality they should never feel that way.
And I would imagine also there's a certain percentage of families who are just simply unaware of it. I mean, no one at the hospital is going to say it's a function of the formula that we decided to use.
Right.
And certainly the manufacturers. And so there's really no way for them necessarily to know
exactly
that could have been that was a function of that formula.
And that's why it's so important to have you at conferences like this and have you be able to tell our story, because a lot of times when we try to communicate these issues to the media, again, it goes back to corporate media. The corporations have control of the media. We're not able to get that message out to tell mothers and tell them in a way that does not make them feel guilty or does not kind of cause them to relive that trauma. There's just so many ways we can help families and so many ways we can make products safer, but it is hard at times to get that message out to the media.
Have they made any change in their product? Or are they still continuing to sell the same product?
So what you'll see is that over time, they make adjustments to their product. And every time what their narrative is that we are trying to make our product closer to breast milk. And it is almost in a sense that they're trying to make it equivalent to breast milk. It'll never be equivalent to breast milk. But if they had made the decision in 2006 when this idea of the human milk formula and fortifier actually became available, then that would have been now 15 years of safer formula feeding for preterm infants. And I think eventually that they will be forced into that change because we are finally getting this message out. But until now, we haven't seen it.
Well, that's one of the two big sort of, I think, positives that come out of these type of cases is one, addressing the needs of those people who've been victimized by these products, and then essentially like making sure there's less victims down the road by convincing, these companies to sort of operate in a different way. Sarah Papatonia, thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. I'm going to switch back to the single shot as part of our ongoing coverage. So many of the stories that I've heard here, and I've been coming here now for 12 years, maybe. A couple of years. I missed some during the pandemic. And the stories I've heard here over the years have been just absolutely very often heartbreaking, but also just incredibly disturbing. I've interviewed and also the attendees. I mean, it's changed a little bit over the years, certainly. But back in the early days, there used to be a lot more attorneys. There's a lot more vendors, it feels like now. But I interviewed Fred Gray here, who was Rosa Parks' attorney.
Wow.
And that was probably about 10 years ago. Well, I think we may have that. I think is probably available only on audio. And one of the most disturbing interviews I remember was with a public interest attorney. They are a firm that will take cases where they don't anticipate like there'll be any profits. And they're a not-for-profit, essentially law firm. And it was about Remington rifles. I'm not sure when that is. Maybe we'll have that link tomorrow. One of the most disturbing stories I've ever heard. I think 60 Minutes did a story about it as well. And I think I did this interview subsequent to that. But it was basically about the best-selling gun in the United States, had a flaw that Remington was aware of, that it would fire without the trigger being pulled. And it caused, obviously many deaths. The story I specifically was interviewing this attorney about was that a guy came to him whose son, I think 18-year-old son, 17-year-old son, was sent to jail for shooting to death his 15-year-old brother. And the son contended the gun went off by itself. And the father testified against him, said guns don't go off by themselves. The older son goes to jail. The father becomes an expert witness on these cases, becomes an expert witness, begins to realize that he was wrong, that Remington had evidence that their guns fired on their own.
Jeez.
But was bound by confidentiality rules in these cases that he had read into, and was going to this public interest attorney saying, like, I'm going to go public with it and I'll be sent to jail, but I'm going to do that. And they leveraged it into getting Remington to do at least a part recall. I mean, it was really amazing. Crazy story. But I've heard this about medical devices and drugs and all of these things, horrific stories. And, a lot of times the attorneys can't express everything publicly. Some things they're protected by, non-disclosure agreements that they make. some things because they don't want to in any way inhibit their client's situation by giving information out publicly or whatnot. But very often they'll be like, after the interview or somewhere where I'm seeing them around, be like, I couldn't even tell you the worst part. Yeah. And it's always this dynamic about an opportunity a cost benefit analysis. That's always the dynamic. And what's interesting is that, back in the day when I would do Ring of Fire Radio, which is affiliated with the Mike Papantonio was one of my co-hosts. The other one was Bobby Kennedy, and we were never in the same location when we would do these shows. Would be remote, but I became friendly with Bobby Kennedy. Ring of Fire was on Air America. Not hang out friendly, but friendly enough to say hello when we see each other and occasionally text or something. And I always, understood that the work he did as a plaintiff's attorney or trial lawyer or whatever you want to call it certainly would lead you to believe in some instances that pharmaceutical companies, really any corporation, is willing to do just about anything to maintain a profit. And then it just becomes a function of like, you need to have rigorous proof, science-based proof. As you know, Kennedy announced on Monday, I think it was, his independent run for president. And I saw one clip, and maybe we'll play it a little bit later, of him on Fox and Friends, just spewing stuff from like Twitter accounts that had already been debunked, saying stuff about Iran that I fundamentally know to be incorrect. And it's really distressing to see this propagation of unsound stuff. I don't know what else to say. But what's really interesting is that, and I had been speculating, Emma, and we've been talking about this.
Yeah.
We'll play that Fox and Friends in a bit, but I'd been speculating that about a month after Kennedy got into the race, that he seems to be running to be Trump's vice president, because he's doing all conservative shows, and his ideology, you can call it anti-establishment if you want, which I think is a little bit silly in the context of a Kennedy, but fair enough. But his ideology, aside from some things that I agree with, problems that we have at the EPA and the FDA, really had fundamentally become very libertarian, or at least he was expressing it in a way that I had never heard him express it before. And what's really funny is, like, I thought he was setting himself up for a run as Trump's VP. Still think it's possible. But he declared as an independent, and then suddenly everybody realizes he appeals to Republicans and conservatives more than he does to Democrats.
I don't understand how people could not have figured that out. Just because he was running as a Democrat? I mean, it was a peculiar decision, but everything he said was libertarian and anti-vax, and now I guess Trump's doing Oppo research on him.
And he was said on every right-wing show where they just praised him to heaven and earth. I mean, he has Fox News on speed dial. He's been on all of the right-wing, YouTube shows, sat down with Jordan Peterson, on and on and on. And now they realize they made a big mistake. Here he is on Sean Hannity.
I really do appreciate your position on the border. You and I are in agreement. It's interesting because everybody's now trying to analyze, whether if there's a three-way race with you, Donald Trump, and Joe Biden, who would you more likely draw from? So I hope you don't mind, but I did a little research on you. You're pretty liberal. You've called for curbing, logging, oil drilling, fracking. You wanted to eliminate it. You called it a victory for democracy. You want to curb U.S. fossil fuel extraction. Keep it in the ground, you once tweeted. You want a ban on fossil fuel extraction, a ban on fracking. You called the NRA once a terror group. You've supported over the years Democrats, Gore, Kerry, Obama, Hillary. You praised Bernie Sanders multiple times. You support affirmative action. So why is this party of yours, why didn't they even want to allow you to compete? Because that's as pretty liberal of a record as anybody I know.
You have a litany of talking points from statements I've made over 40 years. Some of them are stale. Some of them I never said. But, what is your question? Why the Democratic Party? Why I'm not running in the Democratic Party?
Why did they kick you out?
I feel like...
I mean, by the way, I'm giving you comments that you've made in 2016, 17, 19, endorsements. We know the years Gore, Kerry, Obama, Hillary, Bernie Sanders. They're all recent quotes. The NRA quote you made about calling them a terror group was 2018. So these are recent positions you've had. That I'm not sure why the Democratic Party wouldn't allow you to compete.
Do you want to talk about my position, Sean?
Yes, sir.
Do you want to read talking points from the Trump campaign?
Well, excuse me. These are not talking points. These are called Hannity points. I do my own research.
No, but I saw that same list published this morning by the Trump campaign. It's the exact same list. And again, if you want to know what my position is on any issue, I'm happy to talk to you about it.
On those positions, you come off, and this is not an insulting thing. You are historically very left of center, very liberal, and I agree with you. Your party treated you horribly. I think you deserve better. I don't like the way your own family even treated you. I thought, if they don't agree with you, they can disagree. But I didn't like what they said about you. To be honest, I think you're being honest in your positions, but I don't think you can convince any conservative that you have any conservative leanings except for a couple of issues. Maybe some conservatives would agree on the border. Maybe some would agree on your vaccine policy, especially with COVID. Where else would you say you're conservative?
Well, I wouldn't describe myself at this point as part of the conservative ideology or the Democratic ideology. I would describe myself as part of the common sense ideology. If you ask me, Sean, about any particular issue, I'm happy to tell you what I feel about it. And I also am happy to listen to other people's opinions about it.
All right, I'll ask you. Do you still believe the NRA is a terror group?
I support the Second Amendment like I do all the amendments to the Constitution, and I'm not going to take
I didn't ask you if you support the Second Amendment. You called in 2018, you said Parkland students are right. The NRA is a terror group. Do you believe that?
I don't consider the NRA a terror group.
Do you regret tweeting that in 2018?
Well, I don't recall tweeting it in 2018, but if I did, as I said, Sean, I don't consider them a terror group, and I support the Second Amendment.
Do you regret endorsing Al Gore, John Kerry, Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, and Bernie Sanders over the years?
I don't recall endorsing Bernie Sanders. I like Bernie Sanders. I voted for Barack Obama. I don't regret that. I don't. There's a lot of things about those candidates, the candidates who won, that I was disappointed in. I think that we need to wind down the war machine abroad. And I don't think, and I supported Hillary, and I don't think that as Secretary of State that she lived up to those expectations. So, but I'm not going to say that I didn't. I supported the men. I supported what they believe in. I think I have a common sense approach to politics, and I'm happy, as I said, to talk to you about any of the issues.
If I was advising Bobby here, the answer I would have given would have been, I did support them to some degree or another, but I was disappointed, and that's why I left the Democratic Party, or really the Democratic Party left me. I mean, that's the sort of, but what's really fascinating is that he has gotten such kid glove attention from all of these shows that he did not realize how quickly they would turn against him. And I don't know. I really don't understand his campaign. I don't understand why he's running. He never was really running at all to the left on Joe Biden in any meaningful way. I don't even think his anti-support for Ukraine position was even one necessarily that was from the left, because he showed no consistency when it came to the occupied territories and the Israeli occupation of Palestine. I mean, there's no his critiques, even if they would bring you to the same place, were not of the left. And so I think he's really surprised at how hard the right has turned on him when they realized, and Hannity sort of gave it away, that his support was coming more from Trump people.
Well, so there's a few things there that are very amusing. One, Hannity has a direct line to Trump, and we know this conclusively from the January 6th committee, because
it's all been proven. Yes. Yeah.
Sean Hannity texts the Trump campaign, had a very, very close relationship with, and administration, I should say, very close relationship with Trump and his orbit, and was advising him informally, even though he is a supposed journalist in this way. So that was a good dig by Kennedy, because it's true. He's taking this from the Trump campaign, and he's trying to spin this into a critique of the Democratic Party. But what I also, and you're right that Kennedy would have been smart to do a why I left the left thing, but he did show there, Sam, an awareness of where his votes are actually coming from. The way he smarted and got so defensive there at the statements that Hannity made makes it clear who he knows are actually supporting him. And so that adds a level of disingenuousness to it that I think is important to point out, because that means that, when he talks about how he's not right or left, he's just an independent thinker, essentially. That is a right-wing construction. We've heard that all the time. We just had David Feldman come on and do a comedy bit about it,
right?
Where there's all of it. I mean, the Politico did the scathing profile of Kennedy, and this paragraph here I just want to read. Kennedy has built his campaign around this argument that the American people in 2023, perhaps the most lavishly platformed population in any society in human history, are being systematically gagged by their government and its handmaidens on social media and in the mainstream press. For Kennedy, censorship isn't just about punishing speech or even pressuring opponents into silence. It also means decisions by private actors, including those who control social media and the press and other gateways to public debate, who limit what can be said on their own platforms. The article also points out that many of the people who are backing his campaign are Silicon Valley kind of libertarian types who have more control over the flow of social media than any human beings on planet Earth. And so it's just aggrievement. And then when you boil what and it's...
I mean, in some ways, personal
aggrievement that he's mapped out onto a political campaign. And frankly, he's been born with a sense of entitlement. So he thinks that is those are the way that his politics should be moving now, and that his personal aggrievement has some sort of larger constituency. It's all anti-vaxxers, which means it's just conservatives. And so to bring it back full circle, Hannity is doing the work of the Trump campaign because they're worried he'll take 2 or 3% in the general and screw Trump over from becoming king of America.
And I totally get it. I hope that they are right that he will draw votes if he can get on ballots. But I would add too about that point about the sort of like era of authoritarianism that we're living in, when he's upset that private actors are able to censor, have terms of service on their social media sites. I am sympathetic with the idea that we don't want private actors controlling something that has essentially become a utility in many ways, and really doesn't need to be in the hands of private actors, or can be democratized in some ways. I'm sympathetic to his, to some of those claims to an extent, but I'd be far more sympathetic if his position and his problem with COVID policy wasn't that we were inhibiting the ability of private actors to make money during a pandemic. There's no consistency here between his positions regarding, what a private actor can do in terms of having terms of service or whatnot. But it really is fascinating, and it's in many respects it's a little bit sad. I was hoping for a legitimate candidate to primary Joe Biden on, and raise the profile of frankly some of the issues that we talk about. And not because I think that there would be an opportunity for them to win necessarily, although, but so that we could, Bernie Sanders, and I believe to some extent, at least Elizabeth Warren, I know that is a controversial position with some people, but I do believe that both of them were able to bring about material results through their runs for presidency, even in losing.
That's indisputable about Warren. I'm sorry. She was the wealth tax candidate, and Biden just tweeted that he wants a wealth tax. Not that.
Look at the FTC.
Well, the FTC.
Look at what's happening in the DOJ and Cantor. Yeah, right. These are all people who come out of that orbit, and look at what the Department of Labor is doing. Look at the National Labor Relations Board. All of this is a function of these candidacies showing that there are constituencies and that are supportive of these sets of policies. And that's the way politics work. Joe Biden does not know every 40,000 person of the 40,000 person government that gets installed when he gets elected. And these things are delegated out to people who bring the heft and the backing of constituencies and, developed ideas in these things. And I was hoping that we would see a candidate emerge, and over the summer, I was like, we'll do this in September. We'll have, Kennedy on, and we'll have Marianne Williamson on. Both their candidacies, just in different ways, just fell apart, frankly. Kennedy was not pushing any issues that I wanted to have any influence in the Democratic Party. And Williamson was not mounting was not able to build a sufficient campaign that was going to be able to deliver those type of results. Yeah, exactly. And the utility of a primary in those instances falls apart.
It is just frustrating because there could have been a candidate to push Biden on environmental issues or something like that. And Kennedy has the trappings of, the hippie guy that I met Kennedy at Standing Rock, for example. But when you ask him and pin it down, he says he thinks that the private market is the best way to solve these issues. And then that's not serious. That's a libertarian campaign. And you got to ask a question of what is his role here except to do a kind of poor man's version of what Tulsi Gabbard did in 2020, which is say a bunch of right-wing crap and then have go on Fox News, do a bunch of hits there, and say, well, I'm a Democrat, but the rest of the Democrats are going crazy, and this is why I'm leaving the left. But Kennedy just doesn't. He wasn't effective in that role for Republicans. Like, that's what Hannity was trying to get him to do. But it's a bummer, because that is not what environmentalism on the left looks like, and I think hopefully people understand that.
Okay. All right. We'll play that clip from Fox and Friends a little bit later. In the meantime, I will, Emma, I will be back with you in a moment. I'm going to switch to the two-shot. We're really doing some high tech here these days. The two camera shoot.
Oh yeah.
Want to welcome back to the program Chris Paulos with Levin Papantonio Rafferty and from Pensacola. Chris, welcome back. I think it's been a couple of years since we've spoken.
Yeah, I think it's probably been 2 or 3 years since you and I last sat down and talked about things. And it's good to be back. It's nice to see you again.
Well, it's nice to be back here with the covering this conference. One of the things that I've had conversations in the past with attorneys who were going after money that ended up funding terrorism, particularly oil companies, I think it was at the time. And this was, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, maybe more. I can't really remember. And you are starting to work on this in some fashion, but with banks.
That's right. Yeah, I've been handling cases against multinational banks for the last 6 years, involving allegations of money laundering for terrorist organizations and front companies that finance terrorist organizations.
All right, let's get into that, because when I hear that, one of the biggest examples, at least of something like tangentially, was it HBSC?
Yep, HSBC.
HSBC, where they were designing their teller windows in Mexico to the specifications of suitcases full of money. In other words, like whatever the standard, like mid-sized suitcase was, they changed their teller openings so that guys could come in and literally push the suitcase through the window, which to me suggests they were aware, at the very least, that there were sort of atypical sums of cash coming in. And that may have set off an alarm somewhere, but apparently it did not. They were obviously essentially laundering, right? I mean, that's what that is. So walk through it for us. Like, give us an idea of what laundering means in this context.
So banks obviously play a critical role in any business and the modern global economy, and you need to be able to make transactions both electronically and in cash and in large sums. Banks are going to be necessary for you to do that. Also, the differences in currency and the types of currency that certain businesses or that are used across in certain areas of the globe are going to require banks to facilitate transactions that will exchange that currency. So with money laundering, if you're running an illicit organization that's either acquiring large amounts of money or securing or amassing large amounts of money, you're going to need to have somebody within the financial system to assist your management of that and your hiding of that. And so with laundering, there's a few ways that you can launder money. Just basically, you can take money that was obtained through an illegal transaction or some illegal business, illegal crime, and give it the appearance of being legitimately acquired. Or you can actually take what's called clean money that maybe it was donated to a charity out of the benevolence of somebody, and take that clean money and give it to somebody for an illegal or criminal purpose. So there's two types of laundering just based on where the money's coming from and how the money is going to be used. That's at the most basic level of it.
It's almost two different directions, right?
It's basically, is the money obtained for illegal purposes or going to be used for illegal purposes. So there's a two-way, kind of a two-directional flow there that launderers can assist with.
And we always assume that there are safeguards or regulations for banks not to engage in this. Like, I mean, I remember when Rush Limbaugh got busted for going around town in Florida, taking out $9,999 in cash from like 3 different bank accounts so he could go pay for his OxyContin habit.
That's what we call proof of intent.
And I think Elliot Spitzer got, I think that was also flagged because the banks, when you take out $10,000 or more in cash, they send a flag up to, I guess, the IRS or Treasury. And they say, hey, just want you to know, suspicious activity. And if you get close enough that it looks like you're trying not to set off that flag, they set up a flag. What other regulations ostensibly exist to prevent both of those? Because that would be the latter, right? I'm taking good money, using it for illicit purposes. What do they have in terms of what other safeguards they have to both protect against that and the other direction?
Well, in the United States, there's, a lot of statutes and regulations that require certain things of banks. The Bank Secrecy Act and other statutes essentially put banks in a frontline position to assist with the prevention of terrorism and crime. And it gives them the affirmative duty to report suspicious activities. So like you were talking about in terms of the $10,000 transaction, that's an automatic type of flag that is going to be sent to the appropriate regulatory body to be reviewed. But if you see somebody doing exactly what you described Rush Limbaugh is doing, that too is suspicious. And the banks have a duty to not only report suspicious activity, but to know their customers. They need to know who is the account holder, who's the beneficiary of the money in those accounts. And they have a pretty rigorous know your customer obligation. They can't just set up bank accounts for front companies and not do any due diligence into who they're providing a service for. What you just described in terms of HSBC and the teller windows in Mexico is what many of the banks that I have sued did, but in different ways. They created specific departments to handle what they consider to be high-risk customers or transactions in high-risk areas, which are known havens for money laundering and essentially illicit transactions. So
isn't just setting up a so-called high-risk division sort of like prima facie evidence of wrongdoing? Like, I mean, it's not conclusive, but it seems to me like high risk of what? That they're involved in illicit activity.
Exactly. And so,
and are those instances, is there more rigor coming to knowing these people? Like presumably, like I could see like, look, we're not going to paint everybody with a broad brush. There are certain countries or industries that are associated with crime. But it's unfair to say no to all those people on the blanket. But we could create a division where there's heightened scrutiny of these people, and we double our efforts at knowing what they're doing and investigating and making them validated and whatnot. Is that what happens?
Well, you would hope that's what the bank would be doing if they, let's face it, it's a global economy. And, there's hot spots of crime and terrorism and areas of the world where this type of activity flourishes. But in those areas, there's also a need for charitable organizations and NGOs and the Red Cross and Doctors Without Borders who are assisting the population and the people there that are not part of these criminal organizations or terrorist groups. So there needs to be, banking services and economic services in those areas. And so you would hope that banks would be doing an even more rigorous know your customer, due diligence, and even reporting to the regulatory agencies of transactions coming out of those areas. What we've found and what we are litigating in my cases is that banks would identify those high-risk areas or those high-risk customers, and rather than actually being more aggressive in their affirmative duty to help regulators prevent the financing of drug trafficking or terrorism, they would actually create divisions that would service those customers in a way that would allow them to circumvent counterterrorism financing sanctions and allow them to process transactions without being flagged and sent to regulatory for review. So what they were doing for terrorist organizations is actually getting they use a system called SWIFT, or these electronic transactions processing systems. They would help those customers remove data from the SWIFT messaging that would avoid them from being flagged as suspicious. So they would remove customer names. They would put spaces between letters and customers' names so that the automatic filtering systems within SWIFT wouldn't flag those as a transaction for somebody on a terrorist watch list. And so that's what they were doing. And they were charging those customers a premium to do that. So they were making more money to do this for bad people.
That seems like, I mean, it's just a criminal enterprise.
Absolutely. And now, having been involved in these cases for as long as I have, there are recidivist banks. There's banks that are worse than others in terms of doing this. You've probably seen a lot of news lately about Deutsche Bank or Danske Bank or Credit Suisse. There's just some banks that just find themselves routinely in hot water or paying off a criminal fine or a civil penalty to the bank regulators, or being flagged for this type of conduct over and over and over again. And to me, it's just appalling that nobody's gone to jail, and that our regulatory system just allows them to pay it as a cost of doing business and to go on to the next kind of scam.
I mean, I can't help but think of like all of the sort of fraud that was associated with the mortgage crisis, and the both in the servicing of mortgages and in the loaning of mortgages. I mean, they're called loan officers because there's a fiduciary responsibility they have to do their due diligence, and stuff like we saw at Wells Fargo, where they're literally putting clients into other products without telling them. I mean, this is like, it's like George Santos level of like criminality, but there's always this veneer around banks that is like almost like a legacy of like, these are the most straight-laced. These are the most sort of like
too big to fail, and they're so important. And if you question their methods or what they're doing, and there's always this specter of a global economic collapse, and the trade and the market will implode if you clamp down on banks too hard. But the fact is yes, they do play an incredibly important role, and they're 100% necessary to the way that we've structured our economic systems. But they have been given pretty much a free pass, or at least just a slap on the wrist when they've fueled some of the worst humanitarian crises on our planet, or given money to perhaps the most evil people who exist in the world today.
Give me an example of who some of your clients. I mean, do you have clients who you're representing in this way?
In the cases that I'm handling right now against banks, my clients are U.S. nationals, primarily U.S. service members from Iraq and Afghanistan, Gold Star families who lost sons and daughters in those wars, and we have sued banks who have admitted to conspiring with Iran to circumvent counterterrorism financing sanctions that were in place to prevent Iran from being able to finance groups like Hezbollah and Al Qaeda, who we know were using Iranian support, including money, to attack and kill Americans in both Iraq and Afghanistan.
Why is there no or is there governmental enforcement? Because what you're suing them is a violation of U.S. law that was meant to inhibit the ability of bad actors, those deemed by the United States to be bad actors, from getting money. Is there criminal enforcement, and what you do runs parallel to that?
Yeah. So when a moment ago I said these banks have admitted to this conspiracy, and that admission came through their agreement to enter into consent orders and decrees, or corporate integrity agreements with bank regulators like the New York Department of Financial Services or the U.S. Treasury Department. They have signed these agreements that they negotiated that basically means they cannot deny the fact that they entered and were part of this conspiracy, and they paid penalties to the U.S. government for some of this activity. One would hope that they would stop doing the activity that got them in trouble in the first place, but what we've seen is that they've just continued to do this type of business in different ways, and using other banking environments outside of the United States that might be less likely to be reported. So some of the more recent activity we've seen is in the Middle East.
Do you bring cases based upon the actions that they have already admitted to? In other words, this is a civil action as opposed to the sort of quasi-criminal or civil complaints that the government may have brought. You bring more that are more directly to compensating the victims downstream from what they've done in terms of that money, because there's a reason why those sanctions exist, and you're dealing with the implications of those reasons on the sort of where the rubber meets the road. Are you bringing them on those things so that you go into court and it's like, it's already admitted, now we're just arguing about how much damage they've done?
So I wish it was that easy, but yeah. So the documents that I'm talking about and the agreements and the penalties and fines cover a time period of where they were processing these types of transactions for entities that were supporting these terrorist organizations between about 2001 and 2012. So the government investigated them and negotiated them to a point where they were signing these consent decrees, entering into these consent decrees and corporate compliance methods at a time that they were processing these transactions that fueled a lot of the violence in Iraq and Afghanistan. Absolutely. So, but since we filed these cases, they continue to get in trouble for processing. Either there's been some currency exchange networks that these banks have handled in the Middle East, where Iran has been able to basically spread money across various terrorist groups using banks in Iraq and currency exchange networks. Also banks in the Netherlands and in Europe who are doing transactions for the National Iranian Oil Company, and which is essentially the ATM machine for Iranian-sponsored terrorists. It's the generator of money. We're going back to our money laundering discussion. Money that's generated through legitimate and legal oil sales that Iran is allowed to do because it's one of their number one exports. That's money that's apparently legitimate that then is being laundered for use for a criminal or terroristic purpose.
And when they sign those consent decrees or whatever it is, they don't get civil liability immunity, right?
No, they're not immune from lawsuits like ours from victims of terrorism that we can connect to these banks' transactions on behalf of the groups or the state sponsor of those groups, Iran.
Has there been any fall off from this type of activity as you've you've been in it for now 5 or 6 years and increasingly more deeper into it?
Yes.
What's the trajectory?
I think the trajectory is our regulators are always playing catch up, right? So they only find out about things later. Financing sanctions, counterterrorism sanctions, you hear a lot about these days, the sanctions on Russian entities with the Ukraine war. That's all kind of after the fact. So they have to gather the information. They have to put a package together that's like a probable cause package, if not even more detailed than that, and then determine whether or not somebody should be appropriately sanctioned. And that's all based on past conduct. By the time our regulators have put that together and put these sanctions in place, the criminals, the bad guys, and people within the banks who are very in tune with this have probably devised another way to do the same thing. So it's kind of a cat and mouse game, but the regulators and sadly attorneys like me are always trying to play catch up with the new methods that bad guys are using. And of course, now with cryptocurrency and online transactions and other means of transacting money digitally, criminals and terrorists now have more than ever before at their fingertips the ability to take good money and use it for bad purposes or clean their bad money.
If there are people who are trying to be part of the class that you're representing, is it exclusively military personnel?
at this point, the cases that I'm predominantly handling are not exclusive to U.S. personnel, but U.S. nationals that are victims of terror in Iraq and Afghanistan or other places. I handle cases for victims of terror in the United States, including the attack at NAS Pensacola on December 6, 2019, where that attack was committed by an officer in the Royal Saudi Air Force. I would love to be out of a job, meaning there is no more terrorism in the world and people that need my help. But the fact is that over the last 20 years, the terrorism incidents across the globe have exponentially increased. The extremism across the globe has exponentially increased. A lot of that facilitated by the internet and the ability for people to access the darker corners of the web, which contain a lot of violent and extremist ideas.
Chris Paulos, thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Sam. It's good to see you.
Good to see you as well. All right, folks. I think my next guest is here now. And he's going to be sitting down. If you could. And he's going to sit down. Bear with me, folks.
How you doing, Sam?
I'm doing well. We're live. It's tell us your name, what firm you're working for.
Cameron Stevenson, 11 Papantonio Rafferty.
Okay, and so Cameron, let me just check here my notes. Bear with me. I'm trying to find out what. Oh yes, okay. So this is really interesting to me because I was not. Ozempic was not in my consciousness. I mean, I guess I had heard things, but and then somebody had told me like a story about how people in LA, in Hollywood, like I have some friends who are still in that industry, and somebody told me this story that they were talking to somebody who is a trainer out there, and as we're talking like all this Ozempic, and I had, like only in the past like month or two have I been conscious of this, and that the one thing that it's a weight loss regimen. It's not necessarily a weight loss medicine. That the trainer said the one thing that people won't tell you is that they're having to go to the bathroom all the time, and then I just saw a report that said, and I don't know if this is true, I didn't dig into it too much, that there's concern amongst supermarket retailers that their sales are down because of the exponential growth in how many people are on Ozempic. And so, all right, tell us what Ozempic is and how many people are on this drug now.
All right, so Ozempic and the other GLP class drugs, they were
GLP is
it's a long scientific name, but it's just part of the name of the scientific not it's
glucose is it the beginning of it?
Correct.
Okay, because this is a drug to treat diabetes
initially. So these companies, Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly, they initially applied for new NDAs, new drug applications with the FDA to help type 2 diabetics lower their A1C, their blood sugar. That's what they, told the FDA, and that's what it was approved for. But what they always intended from day one, before the drug, even before they even filed the NDA, was we are going to promote and market this drug off-label to not type 2 diabetics, to anyone who just needed to lose 15, 20, 25 pounds. And so all of this is not FDA approved, at least it wasn't initially, but they went to all of these, they have detailers, they go to all of these, primary care physicians, all of these family practitioners, and they convince them that, hey, this is, we had this approved to help diabetics lower their blood sugar, but this will help your patients lose weight. If you have anybody that, just needs to lose 15, 20 pounds. And what they also did was they went out to LA, like you said. They got celebrities on board, some celebrities who never even took the drug. They paid them to promote this drug to make it, it's almost like a culture shockwave. I mean, the Ozempic GLP class is literally taking, not just our country, but to date, I think there are over 20 million people that are taking these injections. And what they did not tell anybody, I mean, you mentioned going to the bathroom.
Being a little leaky.
Yeah, being a little leaky. But what they, you know, and almost what these drugs are designed to do is delay gastric emptying. So instead of your gastrointestinal tract processing naturally, it's supposed to delay that so you feel less hungry. You feel fuller for an extended period of time. But what the
how does that work? I mean, one of the things I've also heard that it's used in treating like smoking cessation or other sort of like, they're not quite sure how it works with like brain function, is it?
So the mechanism is all nerve, it's nerve related, but it's interesting that you mentioned that because there were reports in Europe about whether or not this could, you know, there were people reporting suicidal thoughts with it. And I haven't studied that issue enough because what this litigation is about stomach paralysis and gastroparesis. Because, you know, like you said, some people were a little leaky, but in a certain percentage of the patient population, this delaying of gastric emptying actually paralyzes the nerve endings, and it stops your stomach from processing. And if, you know, I don't know how much you've studied nerve endings, but I did a lot of it with Cauda-Equina syndrome, a lot of medical malpractice cases earlier in my career. But nerve endings are a very touchy, iffy thing. Some people, if you have, you know, temporary nerve damage, it can bounce back in 3 months. It can bounce back in 6 months. Some people, if they have nerve damage, it can last a lifetime. And so these people, there's a certain percentage of the patient population that have stomach paralysis, this condition gastroparesis. They have permanent stomach paralysis. They will never be able to digest their food normally again. And so that is what we are pursuing lawsuits for at this time. But as you said, you know, you just kind of heard about this a month ago, 6 weeks ago. This litigation is in its infancy stage. We are just now kind of, you know, starting to peel back the layers of these documents and what this litigation is about. But it's not pretty.
Okay, so it raises a couple of things. I mean, because like it feels like we have gone from 0 to 60. Like literally just in the past 8 or 9 months. I mean, max, right? I mean, like, do you have any figures on the uptake? Because my understanding is that like, and you would probably know better. And this is all, well, anecdotal for the most part. Is that one? I've heard that you can go to like a spa and get this. You got to pay full price. Or I've also heard people say like, oh, my BMI is over whatever number. And so my doctor says, can prescribe it for me. And then my insurance covers it. But that it's being like, it's just being like, it's everybody's adopting it. And it's like, once you become aware of it, you start to like say something. You're like, oh, my mom's on it. My cousin's on it, or this and that.
It's everybody and it's everywhere. And
how fast has it grown?
This is a good kind of statistic for you. If you follow equities in the stock market at all, which I do, you know, just aside from my career, you know, Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk, after they announced Q2 earnings, their stock was up 20% in 48 hours. Okay. The S&P on a good year annualizes return for investors of 7 or 8%. Okay. These two companies, and it's not just them, it's, you know, there are other, you know, manufacturers of these drugs, but these are the two big pharma players, and their stocks were up over 20% in 48 hours. So what that tells you is that the street, Wall Street, all of the people that analyze these stocks for a living did not estimate the revenues that they were going to bring in for these drugs. So the revenues for the GLP class, Ozempic specifically, and then you've got Wegovy, Rybelsus, they absolutely shatter Wall Street's expectations. So I don't know what the numbers are going to be in Q3 and Q4, but this is taking not just America, but the world by storm. I mean, how long has everybody been waiting for a magic pill or a magic injection that you can take and lose weight and you don't have to watch your diet or you don't have to exercise? Well, that's what they're selling the public. But what they're not telling them is that we didn't study this drug enough. And the studies that we did, there is a litany of medical literature that shows that this can cause gastroparesis and stomach paralysis, and it's nowhere in the warning label. So people have a right to know what the risks are of this drug so that they can weigh the benefits with their doctor before they get on this drug. Now, make no mistake, if you're helping diabetics, lower their blood sugar and lower their A1C, that's fine. That's what this drug was approved for. But they've been off-label promoting this for years, and now it is just starting to come to fruition that these side effects are real and they're happening.
That's the thing, is that it seems like I would imagine that the uptake, the graph on the uptake of the usage of this drug looks like a tree, like it just goes straight up from the roots.
100%. It's not a.
And so the idea that there are side effects that are this quickly presenting themselves,
right?
Which, if you have a small population taking this and they're taking it for a disease that is, there's a cost benefit analysis that's made with every time you take a drug, always.
Right.
And there's always some measure of danger. But if, 10 people are on the drug, it may only be 1 out of 100 who suffer this issue.
Right.
But all of a sudden, we've gone from 10 people to 500 taking it. Now we have 5 people who have this problem, and they're not being informed. We don't one of the things I was told and it was like, well, the thing they know about it, because it's been given to diabetics, is that the drug is safe. But how many years data do we have on this? And do we have a sample size to show that it's safe when you give it to big enough,
The
when you
much
give it
larger
to
patient population.
half the country could be on this in 2 years.
Sam, it's scary. And that's the thing, is it's directly what you said. It's not the amount of people using this is not a growth of, 45 degrees or, 30 degrees. It is literally straight up skyrocketing. And so we are starting to see, we've been looking at this case for a while, but within the last, I would say 6 to 12 months, the amount of inquiries that we've had, the amount of intakes that we've had of people saying, hey, I have this stomach paralysis condition, is skyrocketing in concert with the amount of people taking it.
Wow. And so what how many people at this point, do you have a sense of how many people
We really don't, because it's just, like I said, there's only so many filed cases right now. I suspect that there will be many more filed cases in the next, 3 to 6 months. And eventually, what mass tort lawyers do, we will file a petition with the JPML for an MDL, and all these cases will be consolidated.
Let me listen. A JPML is the
Judicial Panel on Multi-District Litigation.
And multi-district litigation means there are lawyers in Texas, there are lawyers in Wisconsin, there are lawyers. They all have these cases, and instead of tying up the courts in all these different places,
right,
we're going to bunch all these together.
Right.
They have similar but not identical bad outcomes.
Right.
But essentially from the same process. The same inputs, the outputs are a little bit different, but we can come up with an algorithm to address that and the range of different problems. And we go into one court and litigate, and that process also determines who becomes the lead litigator. Is that correct?
Exactly. So, like you said, you have lawyers in every state that have these cases, and they, initially file them in their own jurisdictions. The issue is that it's not efficient to have, thousands upon thousands of the same or similar types of cases in front of different judges all over the country. So you consolidate it for efficiency purposes, and then the court will appoint, sometimes, 8, 10, 12, law firms that are essentially the leadership that drive the litigation. And of course, Levin Papantonio Rafferty, my firm, Mike Papantonio, Troy Rafferty, all of our lawyers are routinely appointed to these leadership positions. So that process has not come to fruition yet, but it will, and we will be a leader in this litigation for sure.
And if people are on Ozempic, and my understanding is to keep the weight off, you got to stay on it, right? Is it possible that you could go on it for 2 months and then come off it and keep that weight off, or is it just generally not the way that it works?
The statistics suggest that once you come off of it, you're going to regress. You're going to have, your weight gain problems back again. And that's because, people, if you study weight loss, people who have sustained, progress and they keep the weight off, it's because they change their diet or they have a lifestyle change. What these drugs just kind of enable, and I don't mean this in a negative way. I mean, I support people, needing to lose weight as long as you're aware of the risks. But, when you don't have to change your lifestyle, when you don't have to change your diet, and you just, take an injection or a pill, if you come off of that, it would stand to reason that, you're going to go back, your lifestyle is the same as before you got on the injection or the pill. So most people do gain the weight back.
So if people have concerns, like is this problem with the stomach paralysis, is that a slow process? In other words, like if people have questions, like things are happening, can you intervene and say like, the doctor says like, you're on your way to stomach paralysis, you need to stop taking this? Or is it one day you wake up, you were more or less fine yesterday, and the next day, boom, you have stomach paralysis?
Unfortunately, it's a spectrum, as most things are. It's not a one size fits all thing. Some people, it's typically not an overnight thing or a week thing. Usually it's going to happen within the first 30 days. But I have seen a gradual progression where you have, a blockage or, what's called an ileus or some sort of a delay in gastric emptying that is more so than was predicted in the efficacy in their clinical trials and their studies. And so, every human body is different. Everything affects everybody differently. So it can be an acute thing in the standpoint of, within a couple of weeks to a month. But I have seen a gradual, ileus, obstruction, and then finally the nerve endings of the sphincter in your stomach give up.
So be careful out there, folks. If you take it,
it is. And just the last thing is, you really need to have the discussion with your doctor about the risks of these medications. And the end all be all is if these companies did not tell the FDA and did not tell the doctors of these risks, how can they have that in their cost benefit analysis?
Right. And we should say, like, I'm just getting an IM now for someone who's been saying they were on Ozempic for a little over a year and take Wegovy. And you do need to make some changes for it to be effective. But that they've had success doing it. I mean, certainly a lot of people have had a lot of success.
With any medication, I would say the vast majority of the people that take this drug may not experience these symptoms. They may have the nausea and they may have vomiting and they may have some leakiness. But you need to be aware that there is a statistically significant percentage of patients that have stomach paralysis and gastroparesis. Sometimes they get better and sometimes they don't.
Well, Cameron Stevenson, I really appreciate your time today.
No, hey, I appreciate it, Sam. And we'll see you soon, man.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you.
All right. All right, let me get back to my one shot. This is just getting more and more sophisticated in the way that I do this, right?
Oh my goodness, this is a high-tech operation we have going on here.
Let's 2:30. Time just flew. Let's should we play another clip here? Which one should we play?
I don't know. The thing is we do have a little bit of breaking news on Steve Scalise, but
we do? What is it?
The House Republicans, via their secret ballot, in a surprising move, have voted to nominate Steve Scalise. Now, that doesn't mean that when it gets to the House floor that he will be able to get a majority of the votes to make him speaker, because this was done in a secret ballot, and it's going to be an issue for certain Republicans to go up against Trump's endorsed candidate in Jim Jordan. But like the passive aggressiveness of nominating Scalise in defiance of Trump, that's interesting to me.
Wasn't Scalise, wasn't Jordan McCarthy's pick too early on, or no? Like, my understanding is some friction between Scalise and McCarthy.
Your mic's down. Your mic's down. Bradley has
They've had like a 15-year, basically, like simmering feud.
Oh, really?
Like Scalise has always been McCarthy's deputy, but Scalise has always tried to like keep the peace among the majority, and he's always kind of waited for McCarthy's downfall.
Well, Scalise has always been waiting in the wings in leadership for a while, and I
Yeah.
guess probably more establishment Republicans want to say, you know, this is Steve's turn. In the leadership structure, that would make sense, but I don't know if when it gets to a floor debate, if this is going to hold.
Right, we don't know what the vote count was, right?
No, it's secret. It was a secret ballot, closed door meeting.
I mean, there's really no way to know. I mean, the scenarios are endless. It is quite conceivable, it seems to me, that the plan is get to the floor, change your vote. They won't know who changed their vote, right? I mean, if it's a secret ballot, I don't know if was it a secret ballot, or was it like raising their hands in the back room? We don't know, right?
We do not know yet. We do not know yet. But
we just know it's closed door. Like it's
we know it's closed door. So in other words, it could be that the caucus knows who voted.
No, it was secret ballot. It was secret
secret
ballot.
ballot.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah, yeah. And some updates here I'm seeing now on NBC News that Matt Gaetz has endorsed Steve Scalise, which is interesting. Very interesting to me, given the fact that Jim Jordan is a founding member of the Freedom Caucus, and that is supposedly Matt Gaetz's kind of coalition.
Well, Matt Gaetz is not a member of the Freedom Caucus, and they were mad at him. And it's also possible that Matt Gaetz perceives that he's just going to go with the candidate that he thinks Kevin McCarthy doesn't like.
Whoa, that's true. But you know what's funny is like he's just picking the more establishment guy. I mean, Steve Scalise is more establishment-y, right? He's been doing this for longer, right? He's been in Congress for forever, if I'm not mistaken. But I guess so. But compared to Jim Jordan,
McCarthy's been in Congress.
Then Jordan. No, I understand that. I understand that. But maybe I'm wrong.
It's also conceivable what happens is people flip their votes to no, essentially, as opposed to yes, when it gets on the floor. And Kevin McCarthy comes in and is the compromise candidate. I have no idea. It's going to be fascinating to watch.
But do we want to hear what Matt Gaetz said right after the vote?
Yeah.
Sure.
Oh, let's see this.
What's your reaction now that Scalise has the vote, Speaker-elect?
Right, Matt.
I'm excited for him. Can't wait to go vote for Steve Scalise.
Absolutely.
Long live Speaker Scalise.
Do you think he has the votes on the floor? He was divided vote in there.
I sure hope so. We'll see some democracy in action.
You think you'll clear this up with one vote on the floor?
So.
Is that who you voted for?
And just to correct
Was that
myself,
the endorsement?
Yeah, I guess so. Just to correct myself, Scalise and Jordan entered Congress at around the same time, so I was wrong
Scalise and
about
Jordan.
that.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Scalise and Jordan. Right.
Yeah, go on.
I wasn't. I don't know how much of an endorsement that was.
I also just wonder if that's like it's just as you guys are saying. I'm wondering if it's literally just like a knife in the back for McCarthy again. Like I don't understand. I don't know how.
Well, Gates' politics are that petty.
Right, and it's just so hard for me to know how sincere he is. Like, will he go on the floor and say, "I support Steve Scalise"?
When is the floor vote supposed to take place?
Should it, at the latest tomorrow?
Yeah,
Tomorrow at some
it's
point.
not going to happen today. They say so. Tomorrow is the watch day, and then we have to see what concessions are going to be made to make either one of those guys speaker. If they do away with the motion to vacate, what kind of committee assignments or whatever they're able to engender or promise. That's
because
what I think a lot of this is there's all this extra pressure for them to have a speaker because they all want to rush weapons to Israel. And that is like adding a certain amount of pressure to, I think, their timeline.
And the government shutdown. Apparently, both Scalise and Jordan say that they're likely going to have to do a continuing resolution. But Jordan says he wants cuts in the continuing resolution, which is not going to happen with the Democrats in the Senate and with the Democrat as president.
Also, importantly, what they were also trying to do prior to the vote for Scalise in the closed door meeting was Jordan's whip operation wanted to change the rules, so with a secret ballot vote had to be all 217 members, or to get to 217, whereas Scalise's whip operation wanted to keep that rule the same, just to maintain it be a simple majority of votes gets to decide who's speaker. I mean, decide who the speaker, like who votes and who gets to be speaker from the secret ballot.
So in other words, we should be clear here. He has not gotten the.
It makes it seem that if they voted to table that measure, meaning that Scalise got a simple majority of votes, but that doesn't mean he got the requisite votes to get to speaker on the floor.
Let me just explain this to people. So there are 217 Republicans in the House. Is that it? Is there 217? And there are 213 Democrats. Wait, that doesn't make 235. There are
I'm double checking here, just the numbers.
221, maybe it is. Republicans 214.
It's right, 221, 212, because there's two vacancies.
Oh, right. Okay.
Right now.
And so 217 would be the magic number that you can afford to have 5 people defect from the Republican caucus. 217 is what Kevin McCarthy could not reach when he had that motion to vacate, or could not reach that number to keep him from vacating. Scalise could have won theoretically with like 150 votes to 67 or 70 or whatever it is. That doesn't mean he's going to get 217 on the floor. He's not going to want Democratic votes. It's unclear to me that the Democrats would give him the votes. So they don't really know. I mean, that's why I get Matt Gaetz may be, I can't tell if Matt Gaetz is just sort of like, yeah, let's vote. I'm excited for it. Scalise won. Yay. And it's not going to happen. We'll see. We'll see what it really is a crap show for them. So let's just play the Bobby Kennedy clip on Fox and Friends, because I do think that's interesting. And then I guess we'll head out. Play the rest of the stuff tomorrow, maybe. So Bobby Kennedy yesterday had a rough day on Fox News. I should say a rough evening on Fox News, because Sean Hannity was very mean to him in telling him that, in reading off the Trump talking points. They did not get the memo at Fox and Friends yesterday. Kennedy was on to talk about both the terror attack in Israel and the terrorizing that Israel is now doing to Palestinians living in the Gaza Strip. And here is Bobby Kennedy, who ostensibly is running as the anti-war candidate as an independent, talk about this and basically just spew not just right-wing talking points, but right-wing talking points that are misinformation. Let's go through this.
Perverse. And then if you look at the history of the region, anybody who believes that narrative, which is a propaganda narrative, should go look at Prince Bandar bin Sultan's speech in 2020. He was a great champion. He was the head of Saudi intelligence. He was at all the peace negotiations. He's a huge champion, lifelong champion of the Palestinian people. And what he said again and again, the Palestinians have been betrayed by their leadership. Yasser Arafat died a billionaire. Mahmoud Abbas, the current leader of the Palestinian Authority, is a billionaire. His sons are 100 millionaires. They keep their people in poverty. Again and again, the Israelis have offered peace on extremely generous terms.
Pause it for 1 second. I do think that it is correct that the leadership of the Palestinian people, for the most part, have done a disservice to the Palestinian people. For the most part. I'm not quite convinced that Israelis leaders have been particularly good for Israel either. But I can stipulate that part of the situation. The fact that Israel has been generous in the peace accords and offering peace is simply belied by the facts. And we've had Daniel Levy, who was, I think he was part of, was it the Oslo Accords that he was a part of the negotiating team, or and others who will say that, you know, it is one thing to say we're going to offer you 90% of the West Bank, whatever that figure is. We're going to call it 98%. Emma, I'm going to give you 98% of your house that I've been occupying. The 2% is going to be, I keep the bathroom and I keep the sink in the kitchen.
Yeah.
The sink, just the sink, the oven, and the refrigerator. You can have some of the counter space. So I'm giving you so much more of the house. But I'm not giving you a place to go to the bathroom, and I'm not giving you a place to cook food. That is essentially what describes the offerings that Israel gave to the Palestinians in the last last legitimate attempt to create any type of peace.
And Netanyahu and the Israeli government haven't even been engaging in talks with
not for ages
years.
now. And let's also be clear. Like, look, I don't need to say this because I can outsource this to the retired head of Mossad. Israel is an apartheid state. And you would add that he thought that the right-wing government they have now is essentially the Ku Klux Klan. This is the former head of Mossad. You can also find like former head of Shin Bet saying similar things. You can find other Israeli politicians.
You can go to the UN. You can go to the Human Rights Watch. You can go to Amnesty International. All declare it an apartheid state by every definition.
But all right, but continue.
Have offered peace on extremely generous terms. Ehud Barak in 2000 offered again and again, 1937, 1947, 2000. The Israelis have wanted to trade peace for land. And they, again and again, the Palestinian leadership has betrayed its own people by refusing to even negotiate about that or refusing to a counteroffer. So there's a long history. Anybody can read it.
One of the things that people have trouble accessing is that, in fact, like the reason why the Gaza Strip exists is because in 1948, not Israelis at that time, Zionist organizations, some of which were considered terrorist organizations by Britain, the Irgun and others, were involved in basically shelling, attacking Palestinian towns in the south. And Gaza Strip became sort of like a refugee camp, essentially, more or less. All the refugees in that area. It became like under the auspices of Israeli occupation after, I think it was the 68 war. From Egypt, they took the Negev. I mean, so this part of the history is never accounted, but you don't need to go through like the tit for tat to sort of like assess the situation. More often than not, when people talk about historical claims, they're not really giving the full picture. But continue.
There's a long history. Anybody can read it. People, again, who are skeptical of that, who are buying this narrative, should go to Prince Bandar's speech, and he recounts it. He was at the front line of everyone, and every time he said, It was the Palestinian leadership, out of greed, out of cowardice, who betrayed their own people by refusing to negotiate for peace.
Riyadh has not given up on their version of the Abraham Accords, expanding it despite this conflict and their relatively unsympathetic statements towards the Israelis initially on Saturday. By the way, we're splitting the screen with you. We're just getting rocket fire into Israel. That was live. Now you're seeing some of the rubble inside Gaza. What's interesting is Gallup did a poll, and they asked Democrats how you feel about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And the majority of young people, 25 to 45, are more sympathetic toward the Palestinian cause. And that's been happening in your now former party. Where does that come from?
I think it's not only the lower levels of the party, too, but I think, President Biden, by giving $6 billion to Iran without any conditions, without any indication or pledges of peace, has probably aggravated the situation.
We got hostages back.
Pause it. This is an abject lie.
Yep.
They didn't give $6 billion. They conditionally unfroze assets that are in a South Korean, I think it is South Korean banks. The money is to be used only for humanitarian purposes. So it's conditioned. Incidentally, none of that money is gone. Not a dollar of it's been spent. It's still working its way through the system. But the idea that you're going to punish the Iranian people. Again, this is conditioned. The money is conditioned. The release of it is conditioned. The use of it is conditioned. Will all of that go there? No. We just spoke to a lawyer who here at this conference who is talking about how money laundering works, but everything he's saying is just literally Republican talking points that are not true. And so nothing about that deal had anything to do with this attack by Hamas. And the idea that Iran is going to get $6 billion of their money back in X number of weeks or months that can be used for humanitarian aid is a greater cause of this attack by Hamas than factors on the ground in occupied Palestine is laughable. It's laughable, but continue.
Has probably aggravated the situation.
Well, we got hostages back in exchange.
Yeah, we got hostages back in exchange, and 3 weeks later, there's now new hostages.
A massive Middle East.
Right, and that's been our policy for a long time, is to not pay for hostages, and because it just encourages more kidnapping and more hostage taking, and that's what we're seeing here.
Well, you've had a busy week. On Monday of this week, you announced in Philadelphia that you're going to run for president as an independent.
All right, that's basically
it. They move on from there. Yeah.
So and I just want to return to the criticisms of the Palestinian leadership here. The problem is that, well, one, we know that Hamas has been the preferred ruling group in Palestine, and that is by the admission of Benjamin Netanyahu and others historically, when they were feeling a bit more threatened by the PLO and other nationalist parties cropping up in the Palestinian territories. They would rather deal with and be able to paint Palestinians as terrorists by associating them with Hamas, and that is a part of like the information warfare that that Israel is engaging in. If there, sure, there have been failures, certainly. The Israeli leadership pretty rich themselves, and the difference is their state-sanctioned violence is backed by the most powerful country in the world and essentially the entire northern hemisphere. And Palestinians are brown. And when their government has problems or their leadership structure, and by the way, they haven't had real elections since 2007 or something like that.
Yep.
When they have issues in their government, well, then that just shows how barbaric they are. I mean, that's really what the end conclusion is of that kind of rhetoric, because other countries are allowed to have leaders that don't represent them adequately. Other countries are allowed to engage in violence and attacks on civilians. But when the Palestinians do it, who have no power, who have no resources, who have no money, except for like sometimes Egypt says, we'll send you humanitarian aid, and they get crumbs of humanitarian aid from other countries as well. And the Saudi Arabia will half-heartedly back them in the press. When that happens, and Iran, of course, right? It's the result of like a completely hopeless situation, and Israel's coming to them in good faith. There is never any grace allowed for the material conditions that Palestinians face, and in the end, all that is just racism, and a bigoted view of what of brown and largely Muslim populations as it relates to politics in the Middle East and politics of colonialism.
Yeah, and one thing to note, and again, this is in no way to excuse or justify the brutal killings of civilians. But one thing I think, is worth noting is the Palestinians have never had access to Western media, to U.S. media, in the way that the Israelis have. In part, because most Israelis speak English. The vast majority of them, overwhelming, speak English. And because, on balance, Israelis, look more like, white people and Europeans.
And have more of a historical connection. I mean, before
Great
Britain
connection.
was occupying Palestine before Israel was a state.
Right. And for whatever reasons, they're also, I think, just, more adept. A lot of them have been, educated in the United States. A lot of them were former Americans. If over the past 10 years, we had access and coverage of the individual stories of parents losing their children, children losing their parents, brothers losing their sisters, sisters losing their sisters, there would be a very different sense in this country as to like how the Palestinian people have been treated, and whether you can turn a blind eye to the collective punishment that's going on. I mean, there is a real reason why they have cut off power in Gaza. It is not because they think it's going to materially impact Hamas. Hamas is down in their tunnels. They have probably stockpiled fuel for these very purposes. It is people who could report out of the country about what's going on in terms of the bombing, if there's an invasion, what would it be the invasion, stories of what happens when these bombs hit the ground, we're not going to hear. And the fact is it's, out of sight, out of earshot, out of mind. And this is, has always been an information war that has been a big part of this. And so just be aware that when you're watching television and you become like visually familiar with 3 different IDF spokespeople because they're on, on a rotating slot, or when you become familiar with, the victims who you should absolutely sympathize for. It's impossible to, hear these stories and not, feel a pit in your stomach. I think if you're in any way a sentient human being. But be aware that in a parallel universe, we could be hearing these stories from Palestinian civilians. Be aware of that absence. Be aware of the absence of people who, will get on television and provide some type of like greater context. That doesn't mean justification at all, but it's essentially, the only way that you can have empathy and understanding for the civilians who are going to pay the price for what Hamas did. And, it's a very dangerous road to go down in saying that civilians are culpable for what the government does, particularly in a place where there hasn't been elections in 17 years.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Osama bin Laden tried to make that argument about Americans. And, we do have elections every 4 years in terms of our presidency, and every 2 years in terms of our Congress and whatnot. And I still don't think that is fair to civilians. So I just wanted to make that point, because we will not hear the horrible stories out of Gaza. And we should hear the horrible stories out of both Israel and out of Gaza. We should to fully understand the suffering of people. We need to hear all the stories. And maybe that brings some pressure to bear on the governments and changing the outcome of this, because nothing we're about to witness or not witness specifically that will take place in Gaza is going to change the trajectory of this. I'm afraid. It's just going to create, more suffering. All right, folks.
Should I read a few IMs? Feel badly because we didn't read any of them.
Yeah, read a couple.
Okay. Wrong from California. Like any medication, particularly ones that are new to market, it's important to work closely with your personal physician who knows your personal medical history. Glucagon-like peptide-1 agonists are no different. These drugs are new, and we will see plenty of adverse effects in the post-marketing phase. Whether they are a result of the drug will be determined by the FDA and various regulatory agencies.
PAX 3757. Are you really telling me this high-tech operation with all these camera changes wasn't capable of making Tim Pool's music sound worse than it already was?
I didn't know you had access to the IMs. Go for it.
Wait, Mia Pink? Hey there, saw Sam and Emma in the Elon Musk Frontline documentary last night?
What?
Is that right? Section with Mehdi Hassan questioning Matt Taibbi regarding his reporting on the Twitter files. It's only a few seconds, but you're in there. Oh, that's exciting.
All right, Bradley said he'll check it out for us.
Terrified Fatty was literally just prescribed Wegovy yesterday. Mama Manola. I was on Ozempic for over a year. Oh, yeah, I read that one already. Steely Danarchy. This money laundering seems evil and wrong, but also fun and cool. Tater Tot. These annual torts conference episodes radicalizes me all over again every year. Douglas, I was just getting a root canal today, and the doc had cable news on in the background during the procedure. The root canal was less painful to experience than the awful backwards ahistorical context-free coverage of the Israel war against Palestinians.
It is impossible to, even turn on cable news right now and get. I will say, Mehdi Hassan on MSNBC Ali Velshi, also on MSNBC. I saw that they actually did some good work on that front. And I'm forgetting there's a blonde anchor named Alex, and I forget her last name. Alex what? Alex Witt did some good stuff. So there is progress. And like, you see the other day on the homepage of the New York Times, the chart showing historically how the killing of Palestinian civilians to Israelis is in a year like 50-1 or 20-1 or 30-1, and that wouldn't have been on the homepage of the New York Times a few years ago. I feel.
I've been watching CNN, and I don't know much about that guy, Ben Weiderman, but he seems to always be the one who brings up, like, this is going to create a lot of problems for Palestinian civilians, like that type of, like, it's not much, and maybe I'm sort of projecting onto it, but it seems like he's trying to sort of provide at least some voice to these people. Sonny Woe, listening a little late in the broadcast, but was surprised to hear you covering the J&J suit. I hate that my first IM is disclosing how my mother passed away earlier this year from ovarian cancer. Sorry to hear that. I just thought to inform you guys, we have won our suit against J&J along with many others, and J&J are doing everything in their power to delay these payouts. Anyways, enlightening coverage as always, hoping to hear good news for all the affected families. All right, 4 more, shall we?
Yes.
Brandon Tarkatov. Sam, you need to listen to Emma more on RFK Jr. She's been telling you all along he's the chaos candidate for Bannon and Stone, and his status as a Kennedy means a broader national media platform for his campaign. It's Kanye West 2020 Part 2 with the methods perfected. Thinking of it in terms of the Democratic primary in any real way is a mistake. It's just a backdrop for a chaos launch.
Potentially, but I mean, his independent run and taking away votes from Trump is like undercutting my theory a little bit. But
totally
telling me that Sam needs to listen to me more. Like, I mean, I'm fine with that. I am.
But it totally undercuts that.
I should just all right. Leave it alone. It's 3:06. Hang up. What are you doing? Go drink.
Ryan and Callie. How did the Dems stop RFK the Lesser from competing, not wanting him, disagreeing with him? He chose to leave the Democrats. No one forced him out. I mean, you could argue that, like, there not being any debate, although he could have debated Marianne Williamson. I don't know why they couldn't have gotten that together. Jim for PA, gotta respect Nancy Mace for being courageous enough to publicly admit to committing adultery in response to deposing the House Speaker. National Labor Relations Board has scheduled the union election for the Major League Rugby players of February 2024. Nick Cavetta is spokesperson for Rugby Union Now and be a good guest on Majority Report ESVN. Want to cover it? Nick Ivetta on Twitter. In the final IM of the day, JR in Philly, Jim Jordan. I'm Jared Fogle without the baggage.
Oh, jeez.
Bradley, Emma, great job today. Matt, great job coming in, figure out why I couldn't hear anybody before the show. Folks, we'll see you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie bar, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I get somewhere the choice was made, for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive between the 101 and the 5. Do you know how far takes you. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. The months drifted into you while I shifted in and